The sound of iron. The sound of Blackwood, Pennsylvania, was a low, grinding hum. It was the sound of the Mercer steel mill chewing through the night, a mechanical heartbeat that had kept the valley alive for 80 years. Cal Mercer stood on the gantry overlooking the main floor, his knuckles white as he gripped the railing. Below him, the orange glow of molten slag illuminated the cavernous space like the fires of a man-made hell. Sparks showered down in golden cascades, bouncing off the hard hats of the night shift crew. He checked his watch. 2:14 a.m. He shouldn't be here. He was the foreman. His shift had ended 5 hours ago. But the silence in his house was louder than the mill. The silence of unpaid bills stacked on the kitchen counter. The silence of his wife, Ellen, sleeping in the guest room because the coughing fits kept them both awake in the master bed. The silence of his son's empty room. "Boss?" Cal flinched, turning sharply. It was Miller, a kid barely 20 years old, face smudged with soot, goggles resting on his forehead. "You all right, Mr. Mercer? You look like you seen a ghost." Cal forced a smile. It felt tight, like rusted hinges. "Just checking the pressure gauges on the B-line, Miller. You know how the regulators get when the temperature drops outside." Miller nodded, buying it. They always bought it. Cal was the rock. The old guard. 30 years in the Union, 20 as foreman. If Cal Mercer said the gauges needed checking, you didn't question it. You just thanked God someone responsible was watching over the place. "Right on, boss. Hey, my mom wanted me to ask, how's Ellen doing?" The question felt like a physical punch to Cal's gut. She's fighting, Miller. She's a fighter. We're praying for her. All of us. Get back to work, kid." Miller saluted and jogged off toward the annealing line. Cal watched him go, a sick feeling rising in his throat. Miller was a good kid. Clean. Honest. Everything Cal's own son, Jesse, used to be before the pills, before the arrest, before the scholarship evaporated like steam. Cal turned back to the shadows of the gantry. He walked to the maintenance panel for the Sector 4 conveyor belt. This was the vein of the beast, the line that carried the high-grade titanium coils, the stuff meant for aerospace contracts. Each coil was worth more than Cal made in 3 years. He pulled a pair of insulated pliers from his jacket pocket. His hands trembled. Just one, he told himself. Just one coil, misplaced, in the inventory log. That covers the chemo for 2 months. It covers Jesse's legal fees. But it wasn't just about inventory. To get the coil out of the secure zone without triggering the alarm, he had to bridge the safety sensor. The sensor that detected weight discrepancies. The sensor that automatically shut down the line if a load became unstable. "It's temporary," Cal whispered to the empty air. "I'll reset it before the morning shift." He jammed the pliers into the panel, twisting the wire. A small spark snapped, blue and angry. The green light on the panel turned to a blinking amber. Bypassed. The conveyor hummed on, blind now. Cal moved quickly. He operated the crane controls, lifting one of the massive, silver-wrapped coils off the line and swinging it toward the loading bay where his truck was backed up, hidden in the shadows of the scrapyard. The crane whined under the weight. The cable groaned. "Drop it. Load it. Get out." He lowered the coil into the bed of his Ford F-150. The suspension screamed as the weight settled. He released the clamps. Done. He was sweating, cold sweat that made his shirt stick to his back. He ran back to the panel to reset the sensor. He reached for the wire. BZZZT. His radio crackled. "Mercer! You there?" Cal froze. It was the plant manager, Henderson. "Mercer, security sensors picked up a power surge in Sector 4. Is the line holding?" Cal stared at the bypassed wires. If he fixed it now, the surge would register again, and Henderson would see the timestamp. He couldn't touch it. Not while Henderson was watching the board. "I'm here, Henderson," Cal said, his voice steady, practicing the lie he would live with for the rest of his life. "Just a breaker trip. I reset it manually. Everything is green. Copy that. Keep an eye on it. That line is running hot tonight." "Will do." Cal pulled his hand back. He couldn't reset the safety sensor. Not yet. He had to wait until the shift change, when the system cycled down for 10 minutes. That was 4 hours away. It'll hold, Cal thought. It's just 4 hours. Nothing happens in 4 hours. He left the panel blinking amber, hidden behind a stack of pallets. He walked out to his truck, the stolen fortune sitting heavy in the back. As he drove away from the mill, the rearview mirror filled with the smokestacks belching gray into the black sky. He thought he was saving his family. He thought he was being the hero. He didn't know that the amber light on the panel had just flickered out completely. He didn't know that the vibration of the B-line was slowly loosening a bolt on the main hydraulic press, a bolt that the safety sensor would have caught, had it been on. Cal turned up the radio to drown out the hum of the mill, but the sound followed him. It was the sound of a clock ticking down. The prodigal. Jesse Mercer sat on the hood of his beat-up Honda Civic, staring at the lights of the town below. From up here, on Miller's Ridge, Blackwood looked almost pretty. You couldn't see the boarded-up storefronts on Main Street. You couldn't see the opioid clinics that had replaced the diners. You just saw the lights, glowing like embers in a dying fire. He took a drag of his cigarette, his hand shaking. He needed a fix. The itch was under his skin, crawling like ants. But he had promised his mom. Mom. The thought of her made his stomach turn. She looked so small in that hospital bed. The chemo was eating her alive faster than the cancer. And the bills, he had seen the envelopes piled on the counter. Red ink. Final notice. He knew his dad was stressed. Cal walked around the house like a loaded gun, jaw clenched, eyes dark. Jesse wanted to help, but every time he tried, he just made it worse. The arrest had cost them $5,000 in bail. Money they didn't have. Headlights swept over him. A black SUV crunched over the gravel, pulling up alongside his car. Jesse stiffened. He flicked the cigarette away. The window of the SUV rolled down. A man with a thick neck and a tattoo of a spiderweb on his hand looked out. Jesse, the man said. His voice was smooth, like oil. You're late on the payment. I know, Vinny. I know. Jesse stood up, trying to look taller than he was. I just need a few more days. My dad, he's working overtime. Vinny laughed, a dry, hacking sound. Your daddy the foreman? I hear the mill is cutting hours, kid. I hear layoffs are coming. My dad won't get laid off. He runs that place. Doesn't matter, Vinny said. He opened the door and stepped out. He was big, towering over Jesse. Debts don't care about the economy, Jesse. You owe us 50 large. The product we gave you to sell? You smoked half of it and flushed the rest when the cops showed up. That's loss of inventory. I panicked, Jesse whispered. Panic costs money. Vinny stepped closer, grabbing Jesse by the collar of his jacket. He slammed him back against the Civic. We're done waiting. You have until Friday. Or what? Jesse gasped. Vinny leaned in close, smelling of cheap cologne and stale tobacco. Or we pay a visit to that nice house on Elm Street. Maybe have a chat with your sick mother. I hear stress is bad for cancer patients. Don't you touch her. Jesse snarled, struggling. Vinny backhanded him. It was a casual blow, but it sent Jesse sliding down the side of the car to the gravel. He tasted blood. Friday, Jesse. Get the money. Steal it, beg for it, sell a kidney. I don't care. Just get it. Vinny got back in the SUV. He reversed, spraying gravel into Jesse's face, and drove off into the dark. Jesse lay there for a long time, staring up at the stars. The cold seeped into his bones. $50,000. It might as well be 50 million. He wiped the blood from his lip. There was only one person who could fix this. The man who fixed everything. He had to tell his dad. He got in his car and drove down the mountain, toward the house. But as he pulled into the driveway, he saw his father's truck. It was backed up to the garage, which was strange. Cal always parked in the street. The garage door was open. Inside, under the harsh fluorescent light, Cal was covering something in the truck bed with a tarp. Something big. Something heavy. Jesse killed his headlights and coasted to a stop. He watched through the windshield. He saw his father's face. Cal looked terrified. He was moving with a frantic energy Jesse had never seen before. Cal tied down the tarp, looked left and right down the empty street, and then closed the garage door. Jesse sat in the dark, his heart hammering against his ribs. His father wasn't fixing the truck. He was hiding something. And for the first time in his life, Jesse realized that the invincible Cal Mercer, the man of steel, was afraid. The exchange. The meeting place was a defunct rail yard in East Scranton, 40 miles from Blackwood. Far enough that nobody would recognize Cal's truck, but close enough that the drive felt like an eternity. Cal pulled the Ford into the shadow of a rusted grain silo. He cut the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the tick-tick-tick of the cooling engine block. A corrugated metal door on a nearby warehouse rolled up with a screech. A man stepped out, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. It was Sully. Cal had known Sully from high school, a guy who had never worked a legal day in his life, who moved copper wire stripped from abandoned houses and catalytic converters sawed off in parking lots. Calvin Mercer. Sully grinned, his teeth yellowed. Long way from the throne room. Cal stepped out of the truck. The air here smelled of wet cardboard and diesel. Cut the crap, Sully. You got the money? Sully walked around to the back of the truck. He lifted the tarp, whistling low as the moonlight hit the titanium coil. Aerospace grade using the alpha-beta alloy process. This stuff is lighter than aluminum but harder than steel. Where'd you get it? The mill inventory logs are tighter than a drum. That's not your concern, Cal said, his voice hard. We agreed on 60,000. Sully laughed, dropping the tarp back down. We agreed on 60 if the market was up. Market's down, Cal. Tariffs. Trade wars. Plus, this is hot. Radioactive hot. If the feds trace this back to your mill, they trace it to me. It's untraceable. Cal lied. Inventory hasn't even missed it yet. 40. Cal felt his hands curl into fists. 55. I need this, Sully. Ellen. Sully's expression softened, just a fraction, but his eyes remained shark-like. I heard about Ellen. Tragedy, truly. But business is business. 45,000. Cash. Right now. Or you can haul that heavy bastard back to Blackwood and explain to Henderson why it's in your truck. Cal looked at the duffel bag Sully kicked toward him. 45,000. It wasn't enough to clear everything, but it would pay the hospital arrears and get the collection agency off his back for a few months. It would buy time. And time was the only currency Ellen had left. Deal. Cal spat. Meanwhile, back at the Mercer steel mill, the sun was just cresting over the smokestacks. Dutch, the morning shift foreman, tapped the glass of the pressure gauge on the Sector 4 control panel. The needle was vibrating, hovering just above the red zone. That's weird, Dutch muttered. He poured coffee from his thermos, blowing on the steam. Miller, the apprentice, walked up with a clipboard. What's wrong, Dutch? Pressure spike on the Beeline hydraulic press. Reading 4,000 psi. That's usually the failure point. Miller looked nervous. Should we shut it down? Initiate a lockout/tagout. Dutch looked at the main safety board. It was a massive grid of lights representing every sensor in the plant. He looked at the light for Sector 4, Sensor B. It was a solid, reassuring green. Sensor says everything is fine, Dutch said, tapping the board. If the pressure was really that high, the sensor would have tripped the auto-kill switch. Cal Mercer was on duty last night. He would have flagged it if there was a real issue. Cal doesn't miss stuff. So, it's just a bad gauge? Miller asked. Yeah. The gauge is probably gummed up with grease. It happens. Dutch took a sip of his coffee. Ignore the needle. Trust the board. Let's ramp it up to 80% capacity. We got a quota to hit. Beneath their feet, deep in the machinery of the Beeline, the hydraulic seal, strained by the actual, unmonitored pressure, began to weep oil. Just a drop at a time. A microscopic failure, invisible to the eye, but growing with every cycle of the press. Chapter 4, Blood Money. Cal didn't go home. He went straight to St. Jude's Medical Center. He sat in his truck in the parking lot for 10 minutes, just breathing. The duffel bag sat on the passenger seat like a second passenger. He reached in, grabbed a thick stack of $100 bills, and stuffed them into the inside pocket of his Carhartt jacket. He locked the bag in the toolbox in the truck bed. Inside the hospital, the air was sterile and cold. The fluorescent lights hummed a different tune than the mill, higher pitched, clinical. He walked to the billing department. The woman behind the glass, Mrs. Gable, knew him by name. She had pity in her eyes every time she saw him, a look Cal hated more than the dead itself. Mr. Mercer, she said gently. We sent a letter yesterday. The administration is pushing for a transfer to a state facility if the balance isn't. Cal reached into his jacket and slapped the stack of bills onto the counter. The rubber band snapped. Mrs. Gable blinked. She looked at the money, then at Cal. That's $10,000. Apply it to the chemo balance, Cal said, his voice raspy. I'll have another 5 next week. Mr. Mercer, we usually require a check or card for amounts this large. It's legal tender, isn't it? Cal snapped. People in the waiting room turned to look. He lowered his voice, shame coloring his cheeks. Just take it. Please. Keep her in the private room. Don't move her. Mrs. Gable nodded slowly, taking the cash. I'll process this right away, Cal. Go see her. Cal walked up to the 3rd floor oncology. Ellen was awake. She looked translucent, her skin like parchment paper stretched over fragile bones. The wig she wore, a blonde bob that looked too shiny to be real, was slightly askew. Hey, Cal whispered, standing in the doorway. Ellen turned. Her smile was weak but genuine. Hey you. You smell like the mill. Didn't have time to shower. Cal pulled a chair up to the bed and took her hand. It was cold. I took care of the billing, Elle. We're good. You don't have to worry about the transfer. Ellen's eyes searched his face. She knew him better than anyone. She knew his paycheck. She knew their savings were gone. Cal, how? Did you take a loan against the pension? Overtime. Cal lied. Lots of overtime coming up. Big contract with the Navy. She squeezed his hand. She didn't believe him, not fully, but she was too tired to argue. You're working yourself to death, Cal. I'm made of iron, remember? He kissed her knuckles. Nothing breaks me. While Cal was playing the hero at the hospital, Jesse was breaking into his father's bedroom. The house was empty. Jesse had watched his dad leave for the hospital. He knew he had about an hour. He tore through the room with the desperation of a drowning man. He checked the closet, the shoeboxes, under the mattress. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he knew what he had seen last night, Cal hiding something. If Dad has money, Jesse thought, his mind warped by fear of Vinny, then I can borrow it. Just for a week. I'll win it back at the track or something. I just need to pay Vinny off. He opened the bottom drawer of the heavy oak dresser. It was full of old work shirts. Jesse dug his hands in, feeling around. His fingers brushed against something cold and hard. He pulled it out. It wasn't money. It was the safety key for the Sector 4 override panel. Jesse frowned. He had worked a summer at the mill 2 years ago. He knew what this was. This key was supposed to be locked in the supervisor's office, only used during maintenance shutdowns. If Cal had it here, at home, it meant the system at the mill was compromised. What did you do, Dad? Jesse whispered. He dug deeper. Under the shirts, he found a small notepad. Cal's handwriting. Calculations. T6Al4V coil. Est weight, 2,000 pounds. Scrap value $30 per pound. Street value? Jesse sat back on his heels. The realization hit him like a slap. His father, the man who preached about integrity, the man who kicked Jesse out of the house for smoking weed, was stealing high-grade metal from the company. Jesse laughed. It was a dry, hysterical sound. You hypocrite! Then the idea formed. A terrible, desperate idea. If Cal was dirty, Cal couldn't go to the police. If Cal was stealing, then Cal had money. And if Cal wouldn't give it to him, Jesse could leverage this. He shoved the safety key into his pocket. He didn't find the cash, but he had found something worth more. He had found his father's reputation. He heard the front door open downstairs. Heavy boots on the hardwood. Cal was home. Rust and bone. The kitchen was dark, lit only by the mesmerizing hum of the refrigerator light leaking through a crack in the seal. Cal tossed his keys on the counter, the metal clatter sounding like a gunshot in the quiet house. He was bone-tired. The kind of tired that settles in the marrow. He opened the fridge, grabbed a beer, and turned around. He nearly dropped the bottle. Jesse was sitting at the small dining table, silhouetted against the window. He wasn't slouching. He was sitting upright, hands clasped on the tabletop. Jesus, Jesse! Cal breathed, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm. You trying to give me a heart attack? I thought I told you not to come back here until you were clean. I am clean, Jesse said. His voice was steady, missing the usual whine. It was colder. I went upstairs to get some of my old clothes. Found something interesting in your dresser. Cal took a swig of the beer, trying to wash away the taste of fear. I don't know what you're talking about. Get out. Jesse didn't move. He slowly unclenched his hand. On the table, gleaming dully in the shadows, sat the brass safety key. Next to it was the small notepad. Cal froze. The beer bottle felt slippery in his hand. That's mine, Cal said, stepping forward. Give it here. Sector 4 override. Jesse read from the tag on the key. He picked up the notebook. And these numbers. Titanium coils. 2,000 pounds. You're not just working overtime, Dad. You're stripping the place. You don't know what you're talking about. Cal growled. That key is for maintenance. I brought it home by mistake. Don't lie to me, Jesse snapped, standing up. You think I'm stupid? You think because I messed up, I don't know how the world works? You're stealing from the mill. The integrity man, the guy who looked at me like I was garbage when I got arrested. Cal slammed the beer down. I did what I had to do. For your mother. You think that insurance covers everything? You think the chemo is free? And what about me? Jesse shouted back, his voice cracking. I'm in trouble, Dad. Real trouble. I owe people money. Bad people. Cal rubbed his face with his calloused hands. How much? 50,000. Cal let out a bitter, sharp laugh. 50,000. You think I have $50,000 sitting around? I just paid 10 grand to the hospital so they wouldn't throw your mother out on the street. I have 35 left, Jesse. And that has to last us 6 months. Give it to me, Jesse said. No. Give it to me, or I take this key and this notebook to the union rep. I take it to the police. The silence that stretched between them was thick enough to choke on. Cal looked at his son, really looked at him. He saw the desperation in Jesse's eyes, the dilated pupils, the sweat on his upper lip. But he also saw a stranger. This wasn't the boy he had taught to play catch. This was a creature made of addiction and fear. You would send your own father to prison? Cal asked, his voice barely a whisper. You'd let your mother die in a state ward just to pay off a drug dealer? Jesse flinched, but he didn't back down. I don't have a choice, Dad. Vinny, he said he'd hurt her. He said he'd come here. Let him come. Cal stepped closer, his chest heaving. I keep a shotgun in the hall closet. Let him come. It's not just him. Jesse screamed. It's the whole crew. Dad, please. Just give me the money. You can steal more. You have the key. Cal stared at the key on the table. The key that bypassed the safety protocols. The key that was currently keeping the beeline running blind. I can't, Cal said. I can't steal anymore. It's too dangerous. The sensors. Then you go to jail. Jesse snatched the key off the table and shoved it in his pocket. I'm taking this as insurance. You get me the money by tomorrow night, or I make a call. Jesse, wait. But Jesse was already moving, bolting out the back door. The screen door slammed shut. Cal stood alone in the kitchen. He sank into the chair his son had just vacated. He put his head in his hands. He had raised the wolf, and now it was at the door. 3 miles away, the Mercer steel mill was screaming. It started as a hiss, a high-pressure spray of atomized hydraulic fluid shooting out of the weeping seal on the beeline press. The fluid hit the superheated casing of the extrusion motor. Whoosh! A fireball erupted in the center of Sector 4. Fire! Fire on the line! Screamed a voice over the comms. The night shift crew scrambled. Alarms blared, a rhythmic honk-honk-honk that cut through the deafening noise of the machinery. Tony, the acting night foreman, grabbed a fire extinguisher. Cut the power! Kill the beeline! I can't! Yelled the operator from the gantry. The controls are locked out. The sensor isn't registering the heat spike. Manual override! Pull the big lever! 2 men rushed the main breaker, heaving the heavy iron switch down. The hum of the beeline died with a groan. The conveyor belt ground to a halt. But the fire was already eating the hydraulic hoses. Thick black smoke rolled up into the rafters. Get the foam! Tony roared. It took them 10 minutes to put it out. When the smoke cleared, the beeline looked like a charred skeleton. The main hydraulic press was scorched, covered in white chemical foam. Tony wiped soot from his face, coughing. He walked over to the control panel, the same panel Cal had tampered with 24 hours ago. Why didn't the auto shutdown trigger? Tony asked, shining his flashlight on the wiring. The panel was dark. The amber light that should have indicated a bypass was burned out. To the naked eye, it just looked like a fried system. Must have been the surge, the operator said, shaking his head. Fried the brain before it could tell the body to stop. Tony kicked the base of the machine. Mercer is going to lose his mind. This puts us down for at least 2 days for repairs. We can patch the hoses, the operator suggested. Bypass the main regulator. Run it manual. Tony looked at the charred machine. He looked at the production quota flashing on the digital board above them, 92% to goal. If we miss the Navy deadline, the mill goes under, Tony muttered. He looked around. Nobody was hurt. It was just a small fire. All right. Patch it. But we need to keep a man on the manual gauge every second it's running. Nobody sleeps tonight. They began to strip the burned hoses, replacing them with spares. They didn't know that the heat from the fire had warped the main support strut of the press. They didn't know that the sensor Cal had bypassed was the only thing that could detect the structural weakness. Back in his kitchen, Cal stared at the empty space where the key had been. He didn't know the fire had happened. He didn't know that his crew was currently jury-rigging a ticking time bomb because they trusted his maintenance record. He just knew he had to get that key back. The heavy hammer. The bottoms was the part of Blackwood that the street sweepers forgot. It was a grid of 4 blocks near the river where the floodlights of the mill didn't reach, a maze of clapboard houses rotting from the humidity and bars that didn't have signs, just neon beer logos buzzing in the windows. Cal drove his truck slow, the tires crunching over broken glass. His shotgun was under the back seat, but he left it there. He didn't want to shoot anyone. He just wanted his son. He checked the trap houses first. He kicked down the door of a squatter's den on 4th Street, ignoring the screams of the junkies huddled in the corner, shining his heavy mag light into their pale, terrified faces. Jesse wasn't there. He checked the park by the levee. Empty, except for a stray dog tearing at a garbage bag. Frustration burned in Cal's chest, hot and acidic. He pulled into the gravel lot of the Rusty Spoke, a dive bar where Vinny's crew was known to hang out. If he couldn't find the debtor, he'd find the debt collector. Cal grabbed the 24-inch pipe wrench from his tool bucket. Ideally, he used it for unjamming valve releases. Tonight, it felt like an extension of his arm. He tucked it into the back of his belt, pulling his jacket down to cover the handle. He pushed through the heavy wooden door. The air inside was thick with smoke and the smell of sour mash whiskey. A jukebox was playing cheap country music. He saw them in the back corner. Vinny was holding court at a pool table, laughing as he chalked a cue. 2 of his muscle, big guys, but soft, doughy around the middle, leaned against the wall. Cal walked straight through the room. The other patrons, mostly laid-off mill workers, parted like water. They knew Cal. They knew the set of his shoulders. Vinny looked up as Cal stopped at the edge of the pool table. "Well, look at this." Vinny smirked, leaning on his cue. "Papa Bear comes out of the woods. You come to pay the tab, old man? Where is he?" Cal asked. His voice was low, drowned out by the jukebox, but Vinny heard it. "Who? Little Jesse?" Vinny took a shot. The balls clattered loudly. "Haven't seen him since last night. He scuffed my shoes. I owe him a receipt for that. He came to my house," Cal said. "He was scared of you. Tell me where he went." Vinny laughed, looking at his goons. "Scared? Good. He should be. And you should be too, coming in here. This isn't the Union Hall, Mercer. You don't have friends here." One of the goons stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. Cal didn't blink. The exhaustion that had been dragging him down for weeks suddenly evaporated, replaced by a cold, vibrating clarity. "I have $35,000 in cash," Cal lied. "I can pay you tonight." Vinny paused. Greed flickered in his eyes. "That's short. The debt is 50. 35 closes it. Or you get nothing." Vinny sneered. "I think I'll take the 35, and then I'll break your legs for the interest." "Check him, boys." The goon reached for Cal. Cal moved. He didn't fight like a bar brawler. He fought like a man who moved heavy machinery for a living. He stepped inside the goon's guard, grabbed the man's wrist, and twisted. There was a sickening pop. The goon screamed. Cal shoved him aside and drew the pipe wrench. The metal gleamed under the pool table light. Vinny's eyes went wide. He raised the pool cue like a club. Cal swung. Not at Vinny, but at the table. Crack. The heavy iron wrench shattered the slate of the pool table. Green felt ripped. Dust flew up. The sound was like a gunshot. The music stopped. The bar went dead silent. "You think you're tough?" Cal roared, the veins in his neck bulging. You scare kids? You threaten sick women? I work with steel that melts flesh off the bone. I move things that would crush you into paste without slowing down. He stepped over the broken table, closing the distance to Vinny. Vinny swung the cue stick. Cal took the hit on his left shoulder. It stung, but he didn't stop. He grabbed Vinny by the throat and slammed him backward into the wall. He pressed the cold jaws of the pipe wrench against Vinny's cheekbone. My son! Cal hissed, spit flying. If you touch him, if you go near my wife, I will take you to the slag pit. I will dump you in, and there won't be enough left of you to bury. Do you understand me? Vinny was gasping, clawing at Cal's hand. The fear in the gangster's eyes was real now. He realized that Cal wasn't playing by street rules. Cal was playing by survival rules. I don't know where he is. Vinny choked out. I swear. He didn't come to me. He's running. He's running, man. Cal held him there for a second longer, the wrench trembling in his hand. He wanted to swing it. He wanted to smash this parasite's face in. The violence was singing in his blood, a dark, seductive song. Do it. End it. Cal squeezed his eyes shut. He shoved Vinny away. Vinny slumped to the floor, coughing. If you find him before I do, Cal said, his voice flat, call me. Don't touch him. Just call me. Or I come back. Cal turned and walked out. His shoulder throbbed where the cue had hit him. His hand gripped the wrench so hard his fingers were numb. He got into his truck and threw the wrench onto the passenger seat. He stared at his hands. They were shaking. He had just threatened murder. And the terrifying part was, he meant it. At the mill, the morning shift was halfway through. The sun was beating down on the corrugated metal roof, baking the air inside. Miller, the apprentice, was sweeping the catwalk above the beeline. He stopped, cocking his head. He heard a sound. It wasn't the rhythmic thump hiss of the press. It was a groan. A low, metallic moan, like a ship hull under too much pressure. Hey, Dutch! Miller yelled down over the railing. You hear that? Dutch looked up from his clipboard. Hear what? Sounds like the metal is stretching. Dutch frowned. He walked over to the patched-up hydraulic press. He put his hand on the support strut, the one that had been warped by the fire the night before. It was vibrating. Violently. Dutch looked at the pressure gauge. It read normal. He looked at the safety board. Sector 4, Sensor B was dark, burned out, they thought. But the bypass Cal had installed was still active, masked by the burnout, sending a false, all clear, signal to the main computer. It's just settling in. Dutch yelled back, though he didn't sound convinced. The new hoses are stiff. Keep an eye on it. Miller nodded, gripping the railing. He looked down at the massive machine. It looked like a beast struggling against a leash. Beneath the layer of white fire-retardant foam that still coated the base of the machine, a hairline fracture appeared in the main strut. It was no wider than a human hair. As the press slammed down, thump, the crack grew an inch. Thump. Another inch. The mill was eating itself alive, and the only man who knew how to stop it was currently driving aimlessly through the streets, looking for a son who held the keys to their destruction. The blind spot. Jesse Mercer stood in the mud of Kowalski's salvage and scrap, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead. It was a graveyard of rusted metal, stacks of crushed cars reaching up like totem poles to a gray sky. Old man Kowalski, a man who looked like he was made of beef jerky and cigarette ash, sat in a folding chair inside the open bay of the garage, cleaning his fingernails with a pocket knife. You hearing me? Jesse asked, his voice rising over the drumming rain. I'm telling you, this notebook has the inventory codes for high-grade titanium. And this key gets you into the secure panels. Kowalski didn't look up. And I'm telling you, kid, get lost. You buy stolen copper. You buy converters. I buy scrap. Kowalski spat, pointing the knife at Jesse. I buy junk that nobody misses until it's melted down. What you got there? That ain't scrap. That's corporate espionage. That's Union property. Jesse held out the brass key, desperate. It's worth money. You could strip the copper wiring out of Sector 4 in a night with this. Kowalski stood up. He was short, but wide. You listen to me. The Steelworkers Union? They don't call the cops when they catch a rat. They break his fingers. You walking around with Cal Mercer's override key? You're walking around with a death wish. Now get off my lot before I call your daddy and tell him where you are. Jesse stumbled back, clutching the key and notebook to his chest. He turned and ran back to his car, his shoes slipping in the oily mud. He slammed the door of the Civic and locked it, breathing hard. He had thought the criminal world was like the movies, a place where anything could be sold for a price. He was learning the hard way that there were levels to the game, and he wasn't even a player. He was just a pawn holding a king's ransom he couldn't spend. He threw the key onto the passenger seat. It stared at him. Vinny, he thought. Vinny won't care about the Union. Vinny just wants his money. But Vinny had scared him to his core. Jesse didn't want to go back there. He put the car in gear. There was one other option. A pawn shop out on Route 9 that didn't ask questions. Maybe they'd give him $50 for the brass and the key itself. It was pathetic, but he needed gas money to keep running. The ICU waiting room at St. Jude's was quiet, a vacuum where time seemed to stop. Cal sat in a plastic chair, his elbows on his knees, staring at the linoleum floor. He was still wearing his work boots, stained with the grime of the mill and the mud of the river bottoms. He looked like a statue of exhaustion. A doctor in a white coat, Dr. Evans, stepped out of Ellen's room. He pulled his mask down. Cal stood up immediately, his back cracking. Doc? How is she? Dr. Evans sighed, rubbing his temples. We stabilized her, Cal. It was a reaction to the new chemo cocktail. Her immune system crashed. Her blood pressure bottomed out. Is she going to make it? Tonight? Yes. But Cal, we need to talk about the reality here. Her body is tired. We can keep fighting, but the aggressive treatment is taking a toll. She's a fighter, Cal said automatically, the same line he had fed Miller. She is. But she needs rest. And she needs you. She's been asking for you. She's terrified, Cal. Cal felt a lump in his throat the size of a coal briquette. Can I see her? 5 minutes. Then she needs to sleep. Cal walked into the room. The machines were beeping, a slow, rhythmic beep, beep, beep that matched the beat of his own heart. Ellen looked smaller than she had this morning. Her skin was gray. She opened her eyes as he approached. Cal, she whispered. I'm here, Elle. I'm right here. He took her hand. You look terrible. She managed a weak smile. Rough night at the mill. Machinery acting up. You work too hard, she murmured, her eyes drifting shut. Don't leave me, Cal. Not tonight. I'm scared to close my eyes. I'm not going anywhere, Cal promised. He pulled the chair close to the bed and sat down, holding her hand in both of his. I'm staying right here until you wake up. His pocket buzzed. Cal ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. Long, insistent vibrations against his thigh. Ellen stirred, her brow furrowing. Cal cursed silently. He gently let go of her hand and pulled the phone out. Caller ID, Dutch, Mill. Cal stared at the screen. If Dutch was calling him in the middle of a shift, it was bad. I have to take this, Elle. Just 1 second. He stepped out into the hallway, pressing the phone to his ear. This better be good, Dutch. I'm at the hospital. Cal, we got a problem. Dutch's voice was tinny, overlaid with the roar of the plant background noise. The beeline is shaking the fillings out of my teeth. Vibration sensors are clean, pressure is normal, but the whole damn floor is vibrating. Cal's stomach dropped. The vibration meant the load was uneven. The sensor he had bypassed, the weight distribution sensor, was the only thing that would catch that. Did you check the hydraulic seals? Cal asked, sweating. Yeah, we replaced the hoses last night after the fire. Listen, Cal, I want to open up the main control panel. Maybe the sensor wiring got cooked in the fire, and it's giving us false readings. I need to check the manual breaker. Cal closed his eyes. If Dutch opened that panel, he would see the jumper wire. He would see the bypass. He would see the crime. Don't open the panel, Cal said, his voice sharp. Why not? If the sensor is fried. Because the panel is pressurized with nitrogen to keep the dust out. Cal lied, improvising wildly. If you crack the seal without the purge kit, you'll blow the circuit board. We don't have a spare board in stock. You open that panel, you shut us down for a week. Henderson will fire you on the spot. There was a silence on the line. Dutch was weighing the risk. So what do I do, Cal? It's shaking bad. It's just the new hoses breaking in, Cal said, looking through the glass window at his dying wife. They're stiff. Increase the hydraulic pressure by 10%. Force it to smooth out. Increase pressure? Dutch sounded incredulous. Cal, if there's a structural flaw, adding pressure will snap it. Trust me, Dutch. I know that machine better than I know my own name. Crank it up. It'll settle. All right, you're the boss. Increasing pressure. Cal hung up. He leaned his forehead against the cool glass of the window. He had just ordered them to pour gas on a fire. But he had bought time. He just needed the shift to end. He just needed to get there tonight, sneak in, remove the wire, and fix it properly. He went back into the room and sat down. He took Ellen's hand again. Everything okay? She whispered, eyes still closed. Yeah, Cal whispered back. Everything is under control. At the mill, Dutch hung up the wall phone. He looked at Miller. What did he say? Miller asked. He said crank it up. Add 10% pressure. Miller looked at the vibrating machine. The moan of the metal had deepened into a growl. That sounds crazy, Dutch. Cal says it's the hoses. He says if we open the panel, we blow the board. Dutch hesitated, his hand hovering over the pressure dial. He respected Cal. Cal was the best. But his gut was screaming at him. Just do it. It's almost lunchtime. Dutch grabbed the dial and twisted it. The hydraulics hissed. The pressure gauge climbed. 4,500 psi. 5,000 psi. The beeline groaned loudly, a shudder passing through the entire steel frame. Then, the vibration changed pitch. It became higher, tighter. See? Dutch yelled over the noise. It's smoothing out. He was right. Miller nodded, looking relieved. Man knows his stuff. They went back to their stations. Deep in the belly of the press, the hairline fracture on the main strut didn't smooth out. Under the increased pressure, the metal screamed silently. The crack shot downward, branching like a lightning bolt, snapping 2 of the 4 anchor bolts that held the massive 10-ton piston in place. The piston was now held by 2 bolts and gravity. And the next heavy load, a titanium coil scheduled for 2 p.m., was coming down the line. The 0 point. Cal dreamed of fire. Not the controlled burn of the blast furnace, but a wild, living thing that ate the oxygen out of the room. He was trying to scream, but his mouth was full of ash. Mr. Mercer? Cal jerked awake, his boots skidding on the linoleum. A nurse was standing over him, checking the 4 bag hanging next to Ellen's bed. The room was bathed in the golden, heavy light of late afternoon. Sorry, the nurse whispered. Just changing the drip. She's stable. Sleeping like a baby. Cal rubbed his face, his stubble scraping against his palms. His neck was stiff, locked up from sleeping in the plastic chair. He blinked at the clock on the wall. 1:55 p.m. The panic hit him instantly, cold and sharp. He had meant to close his eyes for 10 minutes. He had slept for 4 hours. The shift change. The day crew clocked out at 2 p.m. If Dutch handed over the controls to the swing shift without Cal there to supervise the shutdown of the beeline. Cal fumbled for his phone. The screen lit up. 3 missed calls. Jesse, 1:42 p.m. Jesse, 1:44 p.m. Voicemail, one knew. Cal's heart stopped. He stood up, almost knocking over the chair. He pressed the phone to his ear, stepping out into the hallway again. He hit play. Jesse's voice was tinny, broken by static and the sound of wind. Dad, look, I'm sorry. I tried to sell the info. I tried to sell the key. Nobody wants it. They all say it's too hot. I don't have anywhere else to go. Vinny is looking for me. I'm at the mill, Dad. I'm waiting by the employee gate. I'm just gonna leave the key in your locker and… I don't know. Maybe I'll just turn myself in. I'm tired, Dad. I'm so tired. The message ended. Cal stared at the phone. Jesse is at the mill. He looked at the time. 1:57 p.m. If Jesse was at the employee gate, he was less than 50 yards from the Beeline loading bay. And if the machine was running as hot as Dutch said it was… No, Cal whispered. He started running. He didn't say goodbye to Ellen. He sprinted down the hospital corridor, ignoring the shouts of the orderly. He burst out the double doors into the parking lot, the heat of the day hitting him like a hammer. He jumped into his truck, the engine roaring to life. He slammed it into reverse, tires screeching, and peeled out of the lot. The mill was 5 miles away. Please, Cal begged the empty cab, flooring the accelerator. Please hold together. Just 10 more minutes. At the mill, the air was thick with dust. Miller stood on the main floor, wiping sweat from his forehead with a rag. The Beeline was quiet now. Not off, just waiting. The conveyor belt had paused, waiting for the crane to drop the next load. Hey, Dutch! Miller yelled up to the control booth. This is the big one, right? The titanium block? Dutch gave a thumbs up from behind the glass. Last run of the shift. Then we power down for maintenance. Miller nodded. He signaled the crane operator. High above, the overhead crane began to move. Suspended from its magnetic grip was a massive slab of raw titanium alloy, weighing just over 2,000 pounds. It was dense, dark gray, and worth a fortune. The crane swung the load over the intake hopper of the hydraulic press. Miller watched it descend. He felt a strange vibration in his boots. He looked down. The concrete floor was trembling. Not the usual rhythmic throb of the plant, but a jagged, sickening shudder. Dutch! Miller pointed at the machine. It's shaking again! Inside the booth, Dutch frowned. He tapped the gauge. The pressure was holding steady at 5,000 psi, the increased level Cal had ordered. It's fine! Dutch's voice came over the loudspeaker. Drop the load! Miller hesitated. He looked at the machine. The white foam from last night's fire had dried and cracked. And where it had cracked, near the base of the main piston, Miller saw something that made his blood run cold. The steel casing was breathing. It was expanding and contracting, just a fraction of an inch, with every pulse of the hydraulic pump. Abort! Miller screamed, waving his arms in an X. Stop the crane! But the crane operator was looking at Dutch, not Miller. And Dutch was looking at the clock, eager to go home. Dutch hit the green button. The crane released the magnetic lock. Clang. 2,000 pounds of titanium dropped into the hopper. The Beeline engaged. The main piston, held by only 2 overstressed bolts, slammed down to compress the metal. Cal was doing 80 miles per hour in a 35 zone. He blew through a red light at the intersection of Main and 4th, narrowly missing a school bus. He could see the smokestacks of the mill rising above the tree line. Black smoke was drifting lazily into the sky. Just another day, he told himself. It looks like just another day. His phone rang again. It was connected to the truck's Bluetooth. Dad? Jesse! Cal screamed at the dashboard. Jesse, where are you? I'm inside, Jesse said. He sounded small. The gate was open. I'm walking across the gantry toward your office. I'm gonna put the key on your desk. Get out! Cal roared, swerving around a pothole. Jesse, get out of the building! Get off the gantry! What? Why? Dad, I'm trying to fix this. The machine is rigged. I rigged it. It's going to blow. Get out. There was a silence on the line. Dad? Jesse's voice trembled. The floor is shaking really bad. Cal turned onto the service road that led to the mill entrance. He could see the building now, a massive corrugated beast of rust and iron. Run, Jesse! Cal sobbed, slamming on the brakes as he reached the security checkpoint. He didn't stop for the guard. He smashed through the wooden barrier arm, windshield shattering. Dad? Inside the mill, the world turned into slow motion for Miller. As the piston hit the titanium, the resistance was too much. The pressure inside the cylinder spiked from 5,000 to 12,000 psi in a microsecond. The two remaining bolts sheared off like bullets. Ping! Ping! One bolt shot across the room and embedded itself in the concrete wall 3 inches from Miller's head. The piston, now untethered, shot upward, propelled by the explosive force of the hydraulic fluid. It smashed through the top of the machine casing. Boom! A cloud of superheated oil vapor erupted into the air. It hit the hot titanium. Roar! The explosion wasn't just fire. It was force. A shockwave of blue flame and shrapnel ripped outward from Sector 4. The control booth glass shattered inward, burying Dutch in a shower of shards. The gantry above the machine, the metal walkway where Jesse Mercer was standing, buckled as the pistons slammed into it from below. Miller was thrown backward, sliding across the slick floor. Cal's truck skidded to a halt in the loading bay just as the windows of the factory blew out. He saw the fireball roll across the ceiling. He felt the ground jump. Jesse! The line was dead. Cal kicked the door open and ran into the smoke. The furnace. Cal didn't run into a building, he ran into a nightmare. The air inside the mill was no longer air. It was a suspension of black soot, atomized oil, and superheated steam. The fire suppression system had triggered, raining down a deluge of water that hissed as it hit the burning machinery, turning the floor into a boiling swamp of sludge. Visibility was 0. The only light came from the fires burning in Sector 4 and the strobe-like flash of the emergency alarms. Honk! 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 Workers were streaming past him, coughing, faces blackened, eyes white with terror. They were ghosts fleeing a graveyard. Get out! Someone screamed, grabbing Cal's arm. The gas line is gonna go! Cal shoved the man away. My son! My son is inside! He pressed his sleeve over his mouth and pushed deeper into the smoke. The heat was physical, a wall pushing back against him. His eyes burned. Jesse! Cal screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the roar of the fire. He stumbled over a piece of twisted railing. He looked down. It was part of the gantry. The walkway that had hung 30 feet in the air was now lying on the concrete, twisted like a pretzel. To his left he saw movement. Miller was on his knees, dragging a body through the oily water. The apprentice's face was bleeding, cut by flying glass. Cal grabbed Miller by the vest. Miller! Where is he? Where's Jesse? Miller looked up, dazed. Boss? The piston, it went straight up. It took the walkway down. I can't find Dutch. Where was Jesse? Cal shook him. He was on the gantry. Where did he fall? Miller pointed toward the heart of the fire, the wreckage of the B-line. He was crossing over to the office. He was right above it. Cal dropped Miller and ran toward the orange glow. The B-line was gone. In its place was a crater of twisted steel and spewing flames. The massive titanium coil sat in the middle of the wreckage, untouched, a mocking monolith of the wealth Cal had tried to steal. And there, draped over the side of the crushed control booth, was a section of the steel grating from the walkway. Cal scrambled over the debris, burning his hands on hot metal. He didn't feel it. Jesse! He saw a sneaker. A beat-up white sneaker, sticking out from under a pile of ventilation ducting that had collapsed from the ceiling. Cal tore at the sheet metal. He ripped it aside with a strength born of pure adrenaline. Jesse was lying on his back, pinned under a heavy steel beam that had been part of the roof support. His face was pale, untouched by the fire, but his chest. Cal fell to his knees in the water. No. No, no, no. Jesse's eyes were open, staring up at the smoke-filled ceiling. He was blinking slowly. He looked confused. Dad? Jesse whispered. The sound was wet. I'm here, son. I'm here. Cal grabbed the beam, bracing his shoulder against it. He groaned, pushing with everything he had. I'm gonna get this off you. Hold on. The beam didn't move. It weighed half a ton. It's heavy, Dad, Jesse murmured, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. I can't feel my legs. Don't talk. Save your breath. Cal stood up, looking around frantically. He needed a lever. He needed a jack. He needed a miracle. He saw a length of iron pipe lying nearby. He grabbed it, jamming it under the beam. He threw his weight against it. Come on! Cal roared, his muscles tearing. Move, damn you! The beam shifted an inch. Jesse gasped, a sound of pure agony. Stop! Jesse cried out. Dad, stop! It hurts! Cal let go of the pipe, falling back to his side. He grabbed Jesse's hand. It was cold. So cold. I'm sorry, Cal sobbed, the tears cutting tracks through the soot on his face. I'm so sorry, Jesse. I did this. I did this. Jesse looked at him, his eyes struggling to focus. He reached into his pocket with a trembling hand. He pulled out the brass key. Here, Jesse wheezed, pressing the key into Cal's palm. I was gonna put it back. I just wanted to help Mom. Cal stared at the key. The piece of brass that had cost him 50 cents to duplicate. The piece of brass that had just cost him everything. He threw the key into the fire. I know, Jesse. I know you did. Cal stroked his son's hair, slick with sweat and blood. You're a good boy. You're a good man. Around them, the mill groaned. Another support beam buckled somewhere in the dark. Dad? Jesse's voice was fading, becoming thin. Is Vinny here? No, Cal whispered, leaning close. Vinny is gone. Nobody is gonna hurt you. I promise. It's getting dark, Jesse said. Did we win? Did we pay the bill? Cal swallowed the scream rising in his throat. Yeah, kid. We paid it. We paid it all off. Mom is safe. Everything is okay. Jesse smiled. It was a child's smile, innocent and free of pain. Good. That's good. His eyes drifted shut. His chest hitched once, then settled. The breathing stopped. The roar of the fire seemed to fade away. The alarms sounded distant. Cal Mercer sat in the wreckage of his life, holding the body of his son, while the water from the sprinklers washed the blood from his hands, mixing it with the oil and the dirt until it was all just one black, hopeless stain. He rocked back and forth. He didn't scream. He didn't cry out. He just sat there, waiting for the roof to fall on him too. The ash walk. The world returned in flashes of red and blue. Cal didn't hear the firefighters approaching. He didn't hear the saws cutting through the debris. He only felt the vibration of footsteps on the wet concrete, like the heartbeat of the mill coming back to life. Over here! I got 2 survivors! Sector 4! A beam of light cut through the smoke, blinding Cal. He squinted, shielding Jesse's face with his hand. Don't shine that on him, Cal croaked. He's sleeping. A firefighter in a yellow turnout coat knelt beside them. The man's face was hidden behind a respirator mask, making him look like an alien. He reached out a gloved hand and touched Jesse's neck. He held it there for a long moment. Then, he looked at his partner and shook his head slowly. Sir, the firefighter said, his voice muffled. Sir, we need to get you out of here. The structure is unstable. I'm not leaving him, Cal said. He tightened his grip on Jesse's shoulders. He's stuck. I just need a jack. Do you have a jack? Sir, he's gone. You have to come with us. He's not gone, Cal snapped, the anger flaring up through the shock. He's just hurt. Help me lift this beam. The firefighter grabbed Cal's arm. Sir, we can't move him right now. We need to recover the body later. Right now you are in danger. The gas line is leaking. I don't care. It took 3 of them to break his grip. Cal fought them with the desperation of a trapped animal. He swung his fists, he kicked, he screamed until his throat tore. But they were fresh, and he was broken. They dragged him away from the wreckage. As they pulled him back, Cal watched Jesse's white sneaker disappear into the smoke. "I'm sorry!" Cal screamed into the darkness. "Jesse! I'm sorry!" The air outside was shocking. It was cool and clean, smelling of rain and pine trees, a stark contrast to the hell he had just left. They walked him out through the main bay doors. Cal stumbled, his legs numb. He was covered in black slime, a mixture of soot, oil, water, and his son's blood. The parking lot was a sea of flashing lights. Fire trucks, ambulances, police cruisers. And behind the yellow tape, the town of Blackwood had gathered. Wives, children, off-duty workers. They stood in silence, watching the black smoke billow from the building that fed them and killed them. A paramedic rushed forward, throwing a thermal blanket over Cal's shoulders. "Mr. Mercer? Can you hear me? Any pain in your chest?" Cal didn't answer. He stared at the crowd. He saw Miller, sitting on the bumper of an ambulance, holding a bandage to his head. Miller looked up, saw Cal, and started to cry. Then, a figure stepped through the police line. It was Henderson, the plant manager. He was wearing a suit, tie loosened, face pale as a sheet. He looked at the smoking ruin of Sector 4, then he looked at Cal. "Cal," Henderson said, his voice trembling. "My God! They said Jesse was in there?" Cal looked at Henderson. He looked at the man who signed the paychecks, the man who demanded quotas, the man who worried about profit margins. "He's dead," Cal said. The words fell out of his mouth like stones. Henderson flinched. I don't understand. What was he doing on the gantry? And the machine?" Dutch said the pressure spiked out of nowhere. The sensors never tripped. Cal felt a cold spike in his gut. The sensors never tripped. "Where is Dutch?" Cal asked. "He's in the ambulance. Critical condition. Glass in his lungs." Henderson stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Cal, the fire marshal is already asking questions. They're saying the explosion originated from the Beeline cylinder. They're asking why the auto shutoff didn't engage." Cal stared at his hands. The soot was drying on his skin, tightening like a second skin. He could end it right now. He could tell Henderson about the wire. About the debt. About the theft. He could confess and let the police take him away. It would be a relief. It would be justice. But then he thought of Ellen. She was alone in that hospital bed. If he went to prison tonight, she would die alone. She would die knowing her husband was a criminal who killed their son. The cowardice rose up in him, choking him. He couldn't do it. He couldn't kill her too. "I don't know," Cal lied. He looked Henderson in the eye, his soul withering. "I wasn't on shift. I tried to stop him. That's all I know." Henderson nodded slowly, accepting the lie because he needed to. Okay. Get checked out. We'll figure this out." 2 police officers approached. "Mr. Mercer? We need you to come to the station. Just for a statement. Standard procedure." "Am I under arrest?" Cal asked. "No, sir. You're a witness. And a victim." A victim. The word tasted like bile. Cal let them lead him to the cruiser. He sat in the back seat, the hard plastic cold against his back. Through the window, he watched the firefighters rolling out the black body bag. He watched them carry his son out of the mill. He didn't cry. He couldn't. He felt hollowed out, as if the explosion had taken his insides and left only a shell of iron and rust. As the cruiser pulled away, Cal saw a man standing at the edge of the crowd, near the woods. He was wearing a dark jacket, hood up. It was Vinny. The lone shark watched the police car drive past. He didn't look angry. He didn't look happy. He just looked done. The debt had been paid, in a way Vinny never expected. Cal turned his head away. He looked at the reflection of his own eyes in the glass. They looked like the eyes of a stranger. The Casserole Brigade. 3 days after the explosion, the Mercer house smelled like ham, tuna, and stale coffee. The kitchen counters were invisible, buried under aluminum trays and Tupperware containers. The town of Blackwood, unable to fix the tragedy, tried to feed it. It was the Rust Belt way. If you can't pay the bill or heal the wound, you bake a lasagna. Cal stood by the sink, staring out the window at the backyard. The grass needed cutting. The tire swing Jesse had used 20 years ago was still hanging from the oak tree, motionless in the dead air. Cal? He turned. It was Mrs. Higgins from next door. She was holding a plate of brownies. You need to eat something, Han. You look like a ghost. I'm not hungry, Martha. Thank you. Just a bite. For strength. Ellen needs you strong. Cal took the plate because it was easier than arguing. He set it down on a stack of unopened condolence cards. The house was full of people. Friends from the union, neighbors, people he barely knew. They spoke in hushed tones, creating a low buzz that sounded like a hive of bees. Every time someone looked at him, their eyes were filled with a heavy, suffocating pity. He was such a good father, he heard someone whisper in the living room. Tried to save him. Ran right into the fire. Cal gripped the edge of the sink until his knuckles cracked. They were rewriting history in real time. They were building a statue of a hero out of the man who had lit the fuse. The front door opened. A hush fell over the room. 2 men walked in. One was Henderson, looking haggard. The other was a stranger, a tall, thin man wearing a gray suit that looked too expensive for Blackwood. He carried a leather briefcase and wore wire-rimmed glasses. Henderson spotted Cal and walked over, guiding the stranger through the crowd of mourners. Cal, Henderson said, his voice low. I'm sorry to disturb you here. I know it's a bad time. What is it, Henderson? Cal asked. He felt a cold prickle at the base of his neck. This is Mr. Thorne. Henderson gestured to the thin man. He's the forensic engineer sent by the insurance company. And, well, he's working with the state fire marshal. Thorne didn't offer his hand. He just nodded, his eyes scanning Cal's face with a clinical detachment. Mr. Mercer. My condolences. Why are you here? Cal asked. We need to ask you a few questions about the night of the incident, Thorne said. His voice was dry, like shifting sand. Specifically about the maintenance logs for the B-line. Can't this wait? Mrs. Higgins stepped in, bristling like a guard dog. The man just lost his son. The funeral is tomorrow. It's fine, Martha, Cal said, raising a hand. He looked at Thorne. Let's go to the garage. It's quiet there. The garage was cool and smelled of gasoline. Cal's truck was gone, impounded as evidence because it had crashed through the gate, so the space felt vast and empty. Thorne placed his briefcase on the workbench. He clicked it open and pulled out a file. Mr. Mercer, Thorne began, not looking up. You were the last certified foreman to perform a full diagnostic on Sector 4, is that correct? Yes. Night shift. 2 days before the accident. And you logged the safety sensors as operational? They were green on the board, Cal said. The lie came easier this time, greased by practice. Thorne pulled out a photograph. It was a high-resolution close-up of a charged circuit board. This is the control panel for the hydraulic regulation system, Thorne said. We recovered it from the debris. It's badly damaged, obviously. Melted. Fused. Cal stared at the photo. He looked for the jumper wire. He looked for the evidence of his crime. But it was just a mess of black plastic and copper slag. However, Thorne continued, pointing a long finger at a specific blob of metal. We found trace amounts of a high-conductive alloy fused to the sensor B terminal. It looks like bridging material. Cal's heart slammed against his ribs. Bridging material? Cal asked. Like what? Like someone used a manual jumper to bypass the sensor loop. Thorne looked up, his eyes locking onto Cal's. If that sensor was bypassed, the system wouldn't have known the pressure was critical until the bolts sheared. Cal forced himself to breathe. The board was fried in the fire, Mr. Thorne. Everything melted. You're looking at slag and seeing a conspiracy. Perhaps, Thorne said. He didn't blink. But I also checked the digital logs. There was a power surge recorded at 2:14 a.m. during your shift. A surge that should have tripped the breaker, but didn't. Why didn't you report it? I didn't see it, Cal said. I was on the floor. Checking the gauges. Thorne studied him for a long moment. He was looking for the twitch, the sweat, the tell. Cal stood like a stone, letting his grief mask his guilt. The investigation is ongoing, Mr. Mercer, Thorne said, closing the file. If we find that the safety mechanisms were tampered with, the insurance payout for the mill, and the death benefits for the families, will be voided. Negligence is one thing. Sabotage is another. Death benefits. The money for Dutch's family. The money for Miller's trauma counseling. The money that was supposed to keep the town alive. Nobody sabotaged the mill, Cal said, his voice gravel. My son died in there. You think I wanted that? Thorne paused. For a second, the mask slipped, and he looked almost human. Grief makes people do strange things, Mr. Mercer. But it rarely makes them innocent. Thorne picked up his briefcase. We'll be talking again. After the funeral. Cal waited until they drove away. Then he went back into the house, pushed through the crowd of well-wishers, and went into the bathroom. He locked the door. He turned on the faucet full blast to hide the sound. He vomited into the sink. He rinsed his mouth, staring at himself in the mirror. He looked older. The lines around his mouth were deep trenches. He had thought the explosion ended it. He thought the fire would burn the evidence. But the fire was just the beginning. Thorne was like a hound who had caught a scent. Cal reached into his pocket. He pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It was the receipt from the hospital. $10,000 paid. He still had $35,000 hidden in the toolbox of the impounded truck. The truck. Cal froze. The truck was in police impound. If they searched it, if they found the cash, if they found the bag with the titanium residue, he had to get to the truck. But first, he had to bury his son. The weight of rain. The sky over Blackwood was the color of a bruised plum. The rain didn't fall. It was driven sideways by a wind that cut through wool coats and chilled the bone. St. Jude's Cemetery was a sea of black umbrellas. It seemed the entire town had turned out. The mill was closed for the day, a rare silence in the valley, so the men stood in their Sunday best, uncomfortable in stiff collars, their hands clasped in front of them. Cal stood at the edge of the open grave. He wasn't holding an umbrella. The rain plastered his hair to his skull and ran down his neck, soaking his shirt. He didn't feel it. He felt like he was floating outside his body, watching a stranger endure this. Next to him, Ellen sat in a wheelchair, wrapped in 3 heavy blankets. Her face was hidden by a veil, but her shoulders shook with a silent, rhythmic sobbing that tore at Cal's heart more than any scream could. The priest, Father Mulligan, raised his voice over the wind. Jesse was a son of Blackwood. A young man who lost his way, perhaps, but who was found in the end. He died trying to reach his father. He died in the place that built this town. Cal stared at the mahogany casket. It looked too shiny, too perfect to hold the broken boy he had pulled from the wreckage. He didn't die reaching for me, Cal thought, the truth screaming in his mind. He died fixing my mistake. He died because I'm a thief. And let us pray for Calvin. The priest continued, gesturing a hand toward Cal. The crowd shifted. Hundreds of eyes fixed on him. A father who ran into the fire. Father Mulligan intoned. A man who would have traded places with his son if God had allowed it. Job suffered, and so does our brother Cal. Cal looked down at his muddy shoes. He wanted to shout. He wanted to tell them that Job didn't rig the game. Job was innocent. Cal was the devil in the story. As the service ended, the line of mourners began to file past. Handshakes. Mumbled condolences. Stay strong, Cal. He's with the angels now. We're with you, brother. Vinny wasn't there. But Thorne was. The insurance investigator stood at the back of the crowd, under a large black umbrella. He wasn't praying. He was watching Cal. He watched how Cal stood, how he didn't cry, how his eyes darted around like a trapped animal. As the casket was lowered into the wet earth, the gears of the lowering device creaked, a mechanical sound, just like the mill. Cal placed a single white rose on the wood. It looked stark against the dark grain. Goodbye, kid, he whispered. I'll fix it. I promise. The wake was held at the Union Hall. There was whiskey, endless trays of sandwiches, and stories that got louder as the bottles got emptier. Cal stayed for an hour. He made sure Ellen was settled with her sister, who had driven in from Ohio. I need air, Cal told his sister-in-law. I need to. I just need a minute. Go, she said gently. Take a walk. We've got her. Cal walked out the back door of the Union Hall into the rainy night. He didn't stop walking. He walked past his car. He walked past the main street. He turned down cooler roads, heading toward the edge of town where the municipal impound lot sat behind a rusted chain-link fence. His truck was there. And inside the truck, locked in the diamond plate toolbox in the bed, was the duffel bag with $35,000. If the police got a warrant to search the vehicle thoroughly, which Thorne would undoubtedly push for, they would find the cash. They would trace the cash. They would find the connection to the titanium sale. And then they would know that the explosion wasn't an accident. It was felony murder. Cal reached the fence. The lot was dark, lit only by a single flickering sodium vapor lamp on a pole. A guard dog, a massive Rottweiler, was sleeping in a dry patch under the guard shack awning. The gate was locked with a heavy padlock. Cal didn't panic. He knew this lot. He knew the fence had been cut in the back corner by teenagers looking for parts years ago, and the patch job was flimsy. He circled around through the wet brush, thorns tearing at his funeral suit. He found the loose section of fence. He pulled the wire back, creating a gap just big enough to squeeze through. He crawled into the lot, mud soaking the knees of his trousers. He scanned the rows of wrecked cars. Skeletons of sedans, twisted trucks, burned-out motorcycles. There. His Ford F-150 sat in the third row. The front end was smashed where he had hit the gate barrier. The windshield was a spiderweb of cracks. Cal moved low, crouching between the cars. The rain drummed on the metal hoods, masking his footsteps. He reached the truck. He looked at the guard shack. The dog was still asleep. The guard was inside, feet up on the desk, watching a portable TV. Cal moved to the bed of the truck. The toolbox was locked. He reached into his pocket. He had his keys. The police hadn't taken them from him at the scene. In the chaos, nobody had thought to ask for the keys to the vehicle he wasn't driving. He slid the small silver key into the lock of the toolbox. He turned it slowly. Click. The sound was sharp. The Rottweiler's head snapped up. Cal froze. He held his breath. The dog sniffed the air. It let out a low woof, then laid its head back down. Cal exhaled. He lifted the lid of the toolbox. It was there. The black duffel bag. It sat next to his jack and his jumper cables, dry and safe. He grabbed the handle. It was heavy. He closed the lid, wincing as the latch clicked shut again. He turned to leave. A beam of light swept across the row of cars. Who's out there? A voice shouted. The guard. He had heard the click. The dog started barking, a ferocious, guttural sound. Cal dropped to the ground, hugging the muddy earth. The flashlight beam danced over the roof of his truck. I said, who's there? The guard yelled. The door of the shack opened. Rex, heel! The dog was straining at its chain, barking madly into the dark. Cal clutched the bag to his chest. He was 50 years old. He was a foreman. He was a grieving father. And now, he was a thief hiding in the mud. He saw the guard walking down the center aisle, flashlight sweeping left and right. The guard was getting closer. Cal looked at the fence. The gap was 20 feet away. He had to move. He waited for the beam of light to swing to the left. Now. Cal scrambled up and sprinted. Hey! The guard shouted. Stop! Cal threw the bag through the gap in the fence and dove after it. The wire snagged his suit jacket, tearing the sleeve. He yanked himself free, tumbling into the wet brush on the other side. Police! The guard yelled, running toward the fence. Cal grabbed the bag and ran. He ran through the woods, slipping on wet leaves, branches whipping his face. He didn't look back. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs felt like lead. He emerged on a side street 3 blocks away, gasping for air, soaked to the skin, clutching $35,000 of blood money. He leaned against the telephone pole, vomiting bile onto the sidewalk. He had the money. He could pay for Ellen's next round of treatment. He could keep the lie alive. But as he stood there in the rain, Cal realized something terrifying. He had left footprints in the mud around the truck. And he had left a piece of his suit jacket on the wire. Thorne wouldn't need a confession. He was already gathering the pieces of the puzzle, and Cal was leaving a trail right to his own door. The crawlspace. The crawlspace under the Mercer house smelled of mildew and old secrets. It was a shallow, dirt-floored belly beneath the floorboards, accessible only through a small hatch in the back of the pantry. Cal lay on his stomach in the dark, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the floating dust motes. Above him, he could hear the creak of floorboards as his sister-in-law, Sarah, walked through the kitchen, boiling water for tea. He dug into the earth with a garden trowel. The soil was packed hard, dry, and resistant. Scrape. Scrape. He paused, hard hammering, listening to the footsteps above. If Sarah opened the pantry door. Cal? Her voice was muffled through the floor. You in the bathroom? Cal held his breath, switching off the flashlight. He lay in absolute darkness, the duffel bag pressed against his side like a cold body. Must be outside, he heard her mutter. The footsteps moved away. Cal flicked the light back on. He dug faster. He made a hole deep enough to bury a dog. He wrapped the duffel bag in 2 layers of heavy trash bags, taping them shut with duct tape. He placed the package in the hole and began to shovel the dirt back over it. $35,000. It was enough to keep Ellen alive for 3, maybe 4 months. But buried here, under the house, it felt like he was planting a landmine. He smoothed the dirt over. He dragged an old, rusted box of Christmas decorations over the fresh earth to hide the disturbance. He backed out of the crawlspace, emerging into the pantry. He stood up, knees popping, and brushed the dirt from his clothes. He quietly closed the hatch and pulled the rug back over it. He went upstairs to the bedroom. He took off the ruined funeral suit, the mud-stained trousers, the jacket with the torn sleeve. He couldn't put them in the trash. The garbage men came on Tuesdays, and who knew if the police would check? He took a pair of scissors and cut the suit into strips. He put the strips into a plastic grocery bag. He would burn them in the backyard fire pit tonight, claiming he was burning leaves. He was becoming efficient at this. The lying. The hiding. It terrified him how natural it felt. The next morning, the sun was bright and cruel, exposing the wet world of Blackwood. At the municipal impound lot, Thorne stood by the chain-link fence, his expensive leather shoes carefully avoiding the puddles. A sheriff's deputy stood next to him, along with the night guard, who looked hungover. You say he ran that way? Thorne asked, pointing to the woods. Yeah, the guard said, scratching his stomach. Fast guy. Didn't see his face. Just a shadow. Thorne adjusted his glasses. He leaned in close to the torn section of the fence. A scrap of fabric, black wool, high quality, fluttered in the breeze, snagged on a barb. Thorne pulled a pair of tweezers from his pocket. He carefully unhooked the fabric and dropped it into a small plastic evidence bag. Suit material, Thorne murmured. Who wears a suit to break into a junkyard in the rain? He walked over to the Ford F-150. The police had dusted the doors for prints yesterday, finding only Cal's and Jesse's. But Thorne wasn't looking for prints on the doors. He climbed into the bed of the truck. He looked at the diamond plate toolbox. The lid was clean, washed by the rain, but the lock cylinder. Thorne pulled out a magnifying glass. There were fresh scratches around the keyhole. Tiny, bright silver scratches where a key had been inserted hurriedly in the dark. Deputy, Thorne called out. Did your men open this toolbox during the initial inventory? No, sir, the deputy replied. It was locked. We didn't have a warrant to pry it open, and we didn't have the key. We just catalogued the vehicle exterior. Thorne smiled. It was a thin, joyless smile. Someone had the key, Thorne said. Someone came here last night, in a suit, specifically to open this box. And judging by the lack of dust inside. He peered through the gap between the lid and the box. They took something out. What would they take? The deputy asked. Something they didn't want us to find, Thorne said. He climbed down from the truck. I want a warrant to search Calvin Mercer's residence. And I want it today. On what grounds? The deputy scoffed. A piece of cloth? On the grounds that the primary suspect in a multi-million-dollar insurance fraud case just tampered with evidence, Thorne said coldly. Get the judge on the phone. Ellen was in the master bedroom. The hospital bed had been delivered the day before, set up near the windows so she could see the street. She was awake, propped up on pillows. The sedatives had worn off, leaving her eyes clear but incredibly sad. Cal sat in the armchair next to her, peeling an orange. The smell of citrus filled the room, a sharp, clean scent that tried to mask the smell of sickness. Cal, she said softly. Yeah, honey? He handed her a segment of the orange. She didn't take it. She looked at his wrists. Where is it? She asked. Where is what? Jesse's watch. The Tag Heuer. We gave it to him for high school graduation. Cal froze. He remembered the watch. Stainless steel, blue face. Jesse had loved it. He wore it every day, even when he was working on cars. I don't know, Cal stammered. It must have been on him. The funeral director gave me the bag, Ellen said, her voice trembling. The personal effects. His wallet. His keys. His chain. But the watch wasn't there. It probably got lost in the accident, Cal said, looking away. The strap probably broke. Ellen's eyes filled with tears. He loved that watch. He told me once he was going to give it to his son someday. She began to cry soft, heaving sobs. It's all gone, Cal. Everything is gone. He's just ash now. And I don't even have his watch. Cal stood up, his chest tight. I'll find it, Elle. I'll go back to the mill. I'll ask the recovery team. Maybe they found it in the debris. Would you? She looked at him with such hope, such desperate, fragile hope. Please, Cal, bring it home. I promise. Cal lied again. He kissed her forehead and walked out of the room. He leaned against the wall in the hallway, closing his eyes. The watch was gone. Melted or buried under tons of rubble. He couldn't find it. But he couldn't tell her that. He walked downstairs, his mind racing. He had to buy a replica. He had to find a pawn shop, find the same model, scratch it up a bit, and give it to her. He grabbed his keys. A knock at the door stopped him. 3 sharp raps. Cal stared at the wood. He knew that knock. It wasn't a neighbor with a casserole. It was authority. He opened the door. Thorne stood on the porch, flanked by 2 deputies. He held up a folded piece of paper. Mr. Mercer, Thorne said. We have a warrant to search the premises. Cal blocked the doorway. My wife is upstairs. She's sick. You can't come in here. We can and we will, Thorne said, stepping forward. Step aside, Cal, unless you have something to hide. Cal looked at the floorboards beneath his feet. He thought of the crawl space in the pantry. Just keep it quiet, Cal whispered, stepping back. Please. Thorne walked in. Start in the garage, he told the deputies. I'll check the kitchen. Thorne walked straight toward the pantry. Smoke and mirrors. Thorne moved through the kitchen with the slow, deliberate grace of a predator that knows its prey has nowhere to run. He didn't slam cupboards or tear drawers out. He simply opened them, looked, and closed them. Cal stood by the refrigerator, his arms crossed, trying to stop his hands from shaking. Every nerve ending in his body was screaming. Thorne reached the pantry door. Storage? Thorne asked, his hand on the knob. Canned goods? Cleaning supplies? Cal said. His voice sounded thin, stretched tight. Thorne opened the door. The smell of bleach and old onions wafted out. He stepped inside. The space was small, lined with shelves of tomato soup and boxes of pasta. On the floor, covering the hatch to the crawl space, was the woven rug. It was slightly askew from where Cal had hurriedly kicked it back into place the night before. Thorne looked down. He tapped the toe of his expensive Oxford shoe against the edge of the rug. This rug, Thorne said, not looking at Cal. It's a bit out of place in a pantry, isn't it? Usually, people want a smooth floor for sweeping up spilled flour. My wife put it there. Cal lied. Her knees, she kneels to get the pots from the bottom shelf. Thorne hummed, a non-committal sound. He crouched down. He reached out a gloved hand and grasped the corner of the rug. Cal felt the blood drain from his face. If Thorne pulled that rug back, he would see the outline of the hatch. He would see the fresh scratches on the wood where Cal had pried it open. He would see the loose dirt. Do something, Cal's mind screamed. Hit him. Run. Thorne began to lift the rug. Thump. A heavy, dull sound from the floor above. Directly over their heads. Then a scream. High and piercing. Cal! Help! It was Sarah. Cal didn't think. He didn't look at Thorne. He shoved past the investigator, knocking him off balance, and sprinted for the stairs. Ellen! He took the stairs 2 at a time, his boots thudding on the wood. He burst into the master bedroom. The scene froze his heart. Ellen was halfway out of the hospital bed. She had tried to stand up, maybe to go to the bathroom, maybe to come downstairs to stop the police. She had collapsed. She lay on the carpet, her limbs tangled in the sheets, her face an ashy blue. Sarah was kneeling beside her, weeping. She just fell. She tried to get up and she just folded. Cal dropped to his knees. He grabbed Ellen's shoulders. Elle? Elle, can you hear me? Her eyes were rolled back. Her breathing was shallow, a rattling gasp. Call 911! Cal roared at the doorway. A deputy was standing there, looking panicked. I'm calling it in now! Thorne appeared in the doorway a second later. He looked at the woman on the floor, then at Cal. For the first time, the investigator looked unsure. The cold logic of his search had collided with the messy, brutal reality of human tragedy. Clear the room, Thorne said to the deputy, though his voice lacked its usual bite. Give them space. She's not breathing right, Cal shouted, checking her pulse. It was thready, fluttering like a trapped moth. Where is the ambulance? The next 10 minutes were a blur of chaos. The wail of sirens cut through the quiet neighborhood. Paramedics stormed up the stairs, pushing Cal aside to get to the patient. They hooked up monitors, shouted codes, inserted IVs. Cal stood in the corner, pressed against the wall, feeling utterly useless. He was the protector. He was the provider. And he could do nothing but watch strangers try to pump life back into his wife. They loaded her onto a stretcher. We're taking her to St. Jude's, the lead paramedic said. You can ride in the back. Cal nodded, stumbling after them. He didn't look at Thorne as he left. He didn't care about the money, the suit, or the investigation. He only cared about the woman on the stretcher. Thorne stood on the front porch, watching the ambulance pull away, lights flashing against the gray afternoon sky. The 2 deputies stood behind him. What do we do now, sir? One asked. Do we continue the search? Thorne sighed. He took off his glasses and wiped them with a handkerchief. No. Not inside. If we tear the house apart while the woman is dying in the hospital, the jury will hate us. It looks like harassment. We pause the interior search. So we pack up? I said we pause the interior search, Thorne said, putting his glasses back on. His eyes were sharp again. Check the perimeter. The garage, the shed, the yard. Anything that doesn't require us to step on the carpet. Thorne walked down the porch steps into the yard. The rain had stopped, but the grass was soggy. He walked around the side of the house. He was looking for anything out of place. A disturbed patch of dirt. A hidden container. He reached the backyard. It was a modest lawn, dominated by the old oak tree and the tire swing. In the far corner, near the fence, was a stone fire pit. Thorne walked over to it. The pit was full of wet ash. It looked like a black sludge. But Thorne noticed something. The ash wasn't uniform. There were clumps of material that hadn't burned completely before the rain had soaked them. He knelt down, ignoring the dampness seeping into his trousers. He used a stick to sift through the muck. He found a button. A black, plastic suit button. He dug deeper. He found a strip of fabric. It was charred on the edges, smelling of burnt wool and accelerant, but the center was intact. Thorne pulled a plastic evidence bag from his pocket. He used the stick to lift the soggy fabric into the bag. He held it up to the light. It was black wool. The weave was identical to the scrap he had found on the impound lot fence. Well, Mr. Mercer," Thorne whispered to the empty yard. "You burn your clothes, but you don't sift the ashes." He stood up, pocketing the bag. He didn't find the money. He didn't find the titanium records. But he had found something better. He had found proof that Cal Mercer was destroying evidence. Thorne pulled out his phone and dialed the district attorney. "It's Thorne," he said. "Get the paperwork ready. I have enough for an indictment on obstruction of justice. And once we have him on that, the manslaughter charge will follow." At the hospital, Cal sat in the waiting room. The same chair, the same view, the same nightmare. A doctor came out. It wasn't Dr. Evans. It was a specialist. "Mr. Mercer? Is she? She's in a coma, Mr. Mercer. Her body has shut down to protect itself. The stress of the last few days, combined with the chemotherapy, it was too much." Cal felt the floor tilt. "Wake her up." "Can you wake her up?" "We can't," the doctor said gently. "We have her on life support. The next 24 hours are critical. If she doesn't show brain activity by tomorrow morning—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Cal sank back into the chair. He covered his face with his hands. He had stolen the money to save her. He had killed his son to save her. He had become a criminal to save her. And now, she was leaving him anyway. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again. He pulled it out. It was a text from an unknown number. He opened it. There was no text. Just a picture. It was a photo of a wristwatch. A Tag Heuer with a blue face. The crystal was cracked, and the band was stained with something dark, but it was unmistakable. A second message popped up below the photo. "I found it. We need to talk. Vinny." The Vulture. Cal stared at the phone screen until the pixels seemed to burn into his retinas. The cracked face of the Tag Heuer watch mocked him. It was a ghost, a relic from a son he had failed, now held hostage by a man who saw tragedy as an opportunity. He looked through the glass window of the ICU. Ellen was a landscape of tubes and wires, the rhythmic whoosh click of the ventilator the only sign she was still there. "I have to go, Elle," Cal whispered to the glass. "I have to get his time back." He walked out of the hospital, the automatic doors sliding open to the humid night air. He didn't go to his truck, it was still impounded. He walked 2 blocks to a rental car agency, and put a cheap sedan on his credit card, a card that was already maxed out. He texted Vinny back, "Where?" The reply came instantly, "The old drive-in." Screen 2. "Come alone." The Blackwood drive-in had closed 10 years ago. Now, it was a jungle of overgrown weeds and rusting speaker poles. Screen 2 was a massive, peeling white wall that rose out of the dark like a tombstone. Cal pulled the rental car into the lot, headlights sweeping over the broken asphalt. He saw Vinny's SUV parked near the projection booth. Cal got out. He didn't have a weapon this time. He felt too heavy to fight. Vinny was leaning against the hood of his car, smoking. He looked relaxed, almost bored. He was tossing something small and shiny in his hand. "You look like hell, Cal," Vinny said as Cal approached. "Give me the watch," Cal said, holding out his hand. Vinny caught the watch in his fist. He smiled. "Not so fast. This is a nice piece. Swiss movement. Sapphire crystal. Shame about the crack." "You scavenged a dead boy's body?" Cal asked, his voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disgust. "You went into the meal before the fire was out?" "We have scanners." Vinny shrugged. "We listened to the emergency bands. When we heard explosion and Sector 4, we knew there'd be chaos. Chaos is good for business. My boys went in to see if there was any loose copper or tools lying around before the cops locked it down. They found other things. You're a ghoul, Vinny. I'm a businessman. And right now, I'm a businessman who is still owed 50 grand. I have the money," Cal said. 35,000. It's safe. I can get it to you tomorrow. 35 ain't 50. Then he said. He stepped closer. But here's the thing, Cal. I did some thinking. You're a foreman. You run that floor. And I hear whispers, from my friends who work the docks, that a shipment of high-grade aerospace titanium went missing the same night the mill blew up. Cal went cold. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't insult me. Then he snapped. You needed money. You moved product. And then, conveniently, the machine that tracks inventory goes boom. Vinny leaned in, his face inches from Cal's. I don't want the $35,000 anymore. Keep it. Use it for the funeral. Use it for the missus. Cal blinked. What? I want in. Then he said. The mill is going to rebuild. Insurance money is going to flow. New equipment, new materials. I want you to be my key. When the new shipment of alloys comes in for the rebuild, you're going to help me liberate a truckload. Not one coil. A truckload. Worth $500,000. You're insane, Cal whispered. I'm under investigation. The insurance guy, Thorne, he's watching my every move. Then you better be smart. Vinny pressed the watch into Cal's hand. It was cold and sticky. Here. A gesture of good faith. But you work for me now, Cal. You're not the Iron Man anymore. You're my employee. Vinny got back in his SUV. I'll be in touch. Don't make me come back to the hospital. He drove off, leaving Cal standing in the weeds, clutching his dead son's watch. He wiped the face of it with his thumb. The second hand was still moving. At the county sheriff's department, the fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing buzz. Thorne sat in the sheriff's office, the plastic bag containing the charred fabric on the desk between them. The lab report just came back, Thorne said, tapping a piece of paper. Spectrographic analysis confirms the wool from the fire pit matches the wool from the impound lot fence. Identical weave, identical dye lot. Sheriff Miller, no relation to the apprentice, rubbed his jaw. He was a local man, a man who had played football with Cal in high school. He didn't like this. It's circumstantial, Thorne. Maybe he burned a suit because it was covered in oil. Maybe he tore it on a nail in his garage. And maybe he broke into a federal impound lot to remove cash he embezzled from the company. Thorne countered. Sheriff, wake up. The man was desperate. He stole the titanium. He rigged the sensor. He caused the explosion to cover his tracks, and his son walked into the trap. It's Greek tragedy stuff, but it's still a crime. You want to arrest him for murder? Not yet, Thorne said. I want to arrest him for obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence. We squeeze him on that. We put him in a cell. We let him stew. He'll crack. Men like Mercer, they have a conscience. It's their weakness. He'll confess to the rest to clear his soul. The sheriff sighed. He picked up his phone. I'll get the warrant signed. But we do this quiet. I'm not dragging him out of the ICU in cuffs. Quiet is fine. Thorne stood up, buttoning his jacket. As long as it's done. Cal sat in his rental car outside the hospital. He held the watch up to the dashboard light. 11:42 p.m. Time was moving, but he felt stuck. Stuck between the lie he had told and the truth that was hunting him. He put the watch in his pocket. He would give it to Ellen. Maybe somehow she would know. He walked back into the hospital. The night nurse at the ICU station looked up. Mr. Mercer? She said, her voice soft. Dr. Evans was looking for you. Did she wake up? The nurse didn't answer. She just pointed to the room. Cal ran. He burst into the room. Dr. Evans was standing by the bed, looking at the monitors. The rhythm of the beeps had changed. It was slower. Erratic. What's happening? Cal asked, breathless. Her organs are failing, Cal, Dr. Evans said. The coma, she's slipping deeper. We're losing her. Cal grabbed Ellen's hand. It was limp. No. No, you can't. Elle, fight. You promised. She's not in pain, the doctor said. But her body has simply run out of resources. Cal dropped his head onto the mattress. He sobbed, a sound that came from the bottom of his lungs. He had done everything. He had destroyed the world for her. And it wasn't enough. Mr. Mercer? A voice from the doorway. Not a doctor. Cal looked up. 2 deputies stood there. Sheriff Miller was with them. He looked miserable. He held his hat in his hands. Cal, the sheriff said softly. I need you to step outside. Not now. Cal wept. She's dying, Miller. Can't you see she's dying? I know, Cal. I'm sorry. But I have a warrant. Thorne pushed it through. Obstruction of justice. Please, Cal begged. Just let me stay until she goes. Please. Sheriff Miller looked at the dying woman, then at his old friend. He looked at the deputies. Step outside the room, boys, Miller said to his men. Wait in the hall. He turned to Cal. You have until she passes, Cal. But I can't leave this door. And once she's gone, you're coming with me. Cal nodded, tears streaming down his face. He turned back to his wife. He pulled the watch from his pocket and pressed it into her hand, curling her cold fingers around it. I found it, Elle, he whispered. I brought it home. Just like I promised. The monitor beeped. Slow. Irregular. Beep. 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 Cal Mercer held his wife's hand and waited for the silence that would end his life as a free man. The steel cage. The sound of a heart stopping is not dramatic. It is not a crash or a bang. It is a transition from rhythm to tone. Beep. 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 Then simply beep. Cal didn't move. He didn't scream. He watched the green line on the monitor flatten into a horizon that stretched on forever. Dr. Evans stepped forward, his face etched with professional sorrow. He checked the pulse at her neck, verified the pupils, and looked at the clock. Time of death, 12:04 a.m., Evans whispered. He reached over and silenced the alarm. The silence that rushed into the room was deafening. It pressed against Cal's eardrums. She's gone, Cal, the doctor said gently. Cal nodded. He leaned over the bed. He brushed a stray hair from Ellen's forehead. Her skin was already losing its warmth. He looked at her hand, the one he had curled around Jesse's broken watch. You have them both now, Cal whispered to her. You keep him safe, Elle. You tell him I tried. He kissed her cheek one last time. It tasted of saline and fading life. He stood up. He felt light, untethered, as if gravity had released its hold on him. He turned to Sheriff Miller. Miller was standing by the door, his hat crushed in his hands, tears in his own eyes. The two deputies behind him looked at the floor, uncomfortable with the intimacy of the moment. I'm ready, Cal said. His voice was steady, void of emotion. Miller took a deep breath. He stepped forward. He pulled the handcuffs from his belt. The metal rattled, a sound Cal knew well from the mill, the sound of chains and hoists. Calvin Mercer, Miller recited, his voice cracking. I am placing you under arrest for obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence. You have the right to remain silent. Miller gently pulled Cal's arms behind his back. The steel cuffs bit into his wrists. They were cold, colder than the winter air outside. Click. Click. Cal looked back at the bed. At the woman who had been his compass for 30 years. She looked peaceful. She didn't know he was in chains. That was the only mercy in the room. Let's go, Miller said, guiding him by the elbow. The walk through the hospital was a blur of linoleum and staring eyes. Nurses stopped their charting to watch. A janitor leaned on his mop, mouth open. They saw the grieving husband, the man who had just lost his wife, being led away like a common criminal. Cal kept his head up. He wasn't looking at them. He was looking at nothing. They walked out into the cool night air. The back of the patrol car was open. Mind your head, a deputy said, placing a hand on Cal's head as he ducked into the vehicle. The door slammed shut. The cage. The partition between the front and back seats was thick plexiglass, scratched and yellowed. It smelled of vomit and pine cleaner. Cal leaned his head against the window as the car pulled away. He watched the hospital recede into the distance. The lights of the third floor, oncology, faded until they were just stars in a black sky. He had no home to go back to. No family waiting. The house on Elm Street was empty, save for the ghost of a boy in the attic and a stash of money buried in the dirt. The county jail was a brutalist block of concrete on the edge of town, next to the water treatment plant. The booking area was bright, white, and loud. Phones ringing, radios squawking, heavy doors buzzing open and slamming shut. Name? The booking sergeant asked, not looking up from his computer. Calvin Mercer. D.O.B.? October 12, 1974. Empty your pockets. Miller unlocked the cuffs. Cal placed his items on the counter. A wallet. A set of house keys. A crumpled tissue. Belt and shoelaces. The sergeant barked. Cal removed his belt. He sat on a bench and unlaced his work boots. He felt small. He felt like a child being scolded. Stand against the wall. Face front. Flash. Turn to the left. Flash. Right thumb here. Press down. Roll it. The ink was cool on his skin. He looked at the swirl of his fingerprint on the card. It looked like the rings of a tree. A record of a life lived in circles. Mercer, you're in cell block C, administrative segregation until the arraignment. A deputy led him down a long corridor. The floors were polished concrete. The air was stale, recycled through vents that hadn't been cleaned in years. They reached cell 402. The deputy slid the heavy steel door open. Inside. Cal stepped in. The cell was 6 feet by 8 feet. A steel bunk with a thin mattress. A steel toilet. A steel sink. The door slammed shut behind him. The lock engaged with a heavy, final thunk. Cal stood in the center of the cell. He looked at the toilet. He looked at the graffiti scratched into the paint on the wall. Jesus saves. Viper was here. Innocent. He sat down on the bunk. The mattress was hard. He closed his eyes. He tried to picture Ellen's face, but all he could see was the fire. He tried to hear Jesse's laugh, but all he could hear was the scream of the hydraulic press. He was the Iron Man. He had built his life on strength, on endurance, on the ability to take the heat. But iron, when it gets too hot, doesn't just bend. It melts. It loses its shape. It becomes something else. Cal Mercer curled up on the cot, facing the concrete wall. And for the first time since the explosion, he let go. He didn't cry. He just broke. He lay there, shivering in the orange jumpsuit, a man hollowed out by his own design. He was finally safe from Vinny. He was safe from the debt. He was safe from the lies. But in the silence of the cell, he realized the punishment hadn't even started yet. The indictment. Morning in the county jail was announced not by the sun, but by the buzzing of electric locks and the clatter of breakfast trays sliding through steel slots. Cal sat on the edge of his bunk. He hadn't slept. His eyes felt gritty, coated in the same ash that seemed to cover his soul. He looked at his hands. They were clean, scrubbed raw by the jail soap, but he still saw the grease and the blood. Mercer! Up and at M. Court transport in 20. A guard tossed a fresh orange jumpsuit through the bars. It smelled of industrial detergent. Cal changed slowly. He felt like an actor putting on a costume for a play he didn't want to be in. The grieving father. The blue-collar hero. And now the defendant. The transport van was a windowless box. Cal was shackled to a bench seat next to a kid who looked no older than 18, shaking from withdrawals. "What you in for, old head?" the kid jittered. Cal stared at the floor. "I killed my son." The kid stopped shaking for a second. He slid a few inches away on the bench. He didn't ask anything else. The van stopped. The back doors opened. The noise hit them first. It was a roar, a chaotic mix of shouting voices and clicking shutters. "Get out! Keep your head down!" Cal stepped out of the van onto the courthouse loading dock. Behind the chain-link barrier, a sea of cameras and microphones surged forward. The local news. The state papers. Even a van from a national cable network. "Mr. Mercer! Did you rig the machine? Cal! Why did you burn the evidence? Is it true you were stealing from the mill?" Cal flinched against the flashbulbs. The town of Blackwood, which had embraced him at the funeral yesterday, was now here to consume him. The narrative had flipped overnight. He wasn't the victim anymore. He was the villain. The courtroom was packed. Every bench was filled. Cal saw faces he knew, guys from the union, neighbors, the bartender from the Rusty Spoke. At the defense table sat a woman in a cheap gray suit, shuffling through a stack of files. She looked tired, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. "Mr. Mercer," she said without looking up as the bailiff sat him down. "I'm Alicia Vance, public defender. I've read the police report. It's messy. I didn't mean to hurt anyone," Cal whispered. "Stop," Alicia hissed, grabbing his wrist. "Do not speak. Do not look at the jury. There is no jury yet. Look at the table. Do exactly what I say. We are pleading not guilty today. Standard procedure. But if you plead guilty now, you go away for 20 years, she whispered fiercely. We need discovery. We need to see what they actually have. Shut up and let me do my job. All rise." Judge Holloway entered. He was a stern man with a face like a dried apple. He looked at Cal over his spectacles with disdain. "Case number 44 to 920. The People vs. Calvin Mercer." The district attorney, Marcus Sterling, stood up. He was a shark in a pinstripe suit, smelling blood in the water. He was up for re-election, and convicting a corrupt foreman was a gold star. "Your Honor," Sterling's voice boomed, "the state is filing amended charges. In addition to the felony counts of obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence, we are adding 1 count of grand larceny and 1 count of involuntary manslaughter." A gasp went through the gallery. Alicia stiffened beside Cal. "Manslaughter?" Judge Holloway asked. "Based on what grounds?" "Based on the fact," Sterling said, pacing before the bench, "that the defendant, Calvin Mercer, willfully bypassed the critical safety sensor on the Beeline hydraulic press, Sector 4, in order to facilitate the theft of high-grade aerospace titanium." Sterling walked to his table and picked up a report. "The state's investigation, led by Mr. Thorne of the Insurance Board, has recovered titanium dust from the bed of the defendant's truck. This dust matches the metallurgical fingerprint of the specific alloy coils produced on the Beeline. Furthermore, trace amounts of this same alloy were found fused to the bypassed sensor terminal." Sterling turned to point a finger at Cal. "The defendant rigged the machine to steal. That rig caused the pressure failure. That failure caused the explosion. And that explosion killed Jesse Mercer. This wasn't an accident, Your Honor. It was greed that cost a human life." Cal felt the room spinning. Greed. Is that what they thought? He wanted to scream about the medical bills, about the cancer, about the desperation. But nobody cared about the why. They only cared about the what. "How does the defendant plead?" Judge Holloway asked. Alicia nudged him. Cal stood up. His legs felt like water. He looked at Thorne, sitting in the front row, taking notes in a small black book. He looked at Henderson, who was shaking his head in disgust. "Not guilty," Cal croaked. "Louder, Mr. Mercer," the judge said. "Not guilty, Your Honor." "Bail?" the judge asked. "The state requests remand without bail," Sterling argued. "The defendant has already demonstrated a willingness to destroy evidence, burning his clothing, attempting to clean the crime scene. He is a flight risk. And frankly, for his own safety, the town is angry, Your Honor." Alicia stood up. "Your Honor, my client just buried his son and lost his wife last night. He has deep roots in this community. He is not a flight risk, he is a broken man." Judge Holloway looked at Cal. He saw the hollowness in his eyes. "Bail is set at $500,000 cash," Holloway ruled. He slammed the gavel. "Take him away." As the bailiffs hauled him up, Cal looked back at the gallery one last time. He saw Miller, the young apprentice. The bandage was still on his head. Miller wasn't crying anymore. He was staring at Cal with a look of pure, unadulterated betrayal. Cal had taught Miller everything. He had been a father figure to him. And now Miller knew that Cal had lied to him, endangered him, and nearly killed him. Cal looked away, shame burning his face hotter than the furnace. They led him out the side door. $500,000, Alicia said, gathering her files as she walked alongside the bailiffs. Do you have anyone who can put up collateral? A house? Assets? The house is mortgaged, Cal said dully. The bank owns it. Then you're staying in, Alicia said. I'll come see you next week. Don't talk to the guards. Don't talk to other inmates. Everyone is a snitch. She turned to leave, but then paused. She looked at him, her expression softening just a fraction. Mercer, she said. The titanium, did you really do it? Cal looked at her. He saw the curiosity of a lawyer, but also the judgment of a human being. My wife had cancer, Cal said. Alicia stared at him for a long moment. Then she sighed, shaking her head. That's not a no, Cal. That's a motive. She walked away. Cal was shoved back into the holding cell. The door clanged shut. He sat on the bench. He was alone. But he wasn't entirely alone. He thought of the crawl space. $35,000. It wasn't enough for bail. It wasn't enough for a lawyer. It was just a pile of paper rotting in the dirt. And somewhere in the city, Vinny was watching the news. Vinny knew Cal was locked up. Vinny knew Cal couldn't deliver the truckload he had demanded. And Vinny knew where the house was. Cal closed his eyes. He realized with a sick dread that being in jail didn't mean the game was over. It just meant he was helpless to stop the next piece from falling. The feeding chain. Cell block C was a concrete lung that breathed in tension and exhaled violence. It housed the awaiting trial population, the drug dealers, the domestic abusers, the drunk drivers, and now, the killer Foreman. Cal sat at a steel table in the common area during his hour of rec time. He stared at a plastic cup of lukewarm water. He kept his head down, shoulders hunched, trying to make himself small. It was impossible. He was a big man, built from decades of lifting steel, and his silence only made him more conspicuous. Hey! You the guy from the news? A shadow fell over the table. Cal didn't look up. I'm talking to you, Pops. Cal slowly raised his eyes. Standing there was a man named Reese. Neck tattoos, eyes like shark glass. He was holding a tray of food he hadn't touched. I asked if you're the guy who cooked his own kid. The noise in the cell block dipped. In prison, crimes against children, even accidental ones, put a target on your back. It was a twisted code of ethics among men who had none. It was an accident, Cal said, his voice raspy. Accident, Reese mocked, looking around at his crew. He rigged the machine to steal money, and his boy got squashed. That ain't an accident. That's a sacrifice. Reese leaned in, spitting on the table next to Cal's hand. We don't like child killers in here, Pops. You better sleep with one eye open. Cal looked at the spit. Then he looked at Reese. Something in Cal shifted. The grief that had been drowning him for days hardened into something cold and sharp. He stood up. He was 3 inches taller than Reese and 50 pounds heavier. I buried my wife yesterday, Cal said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the low-frequency rumble of a blast furnace. I watched my son die in my arms. Do you really think I care what you do to me? Cal stepped closer, invading Reese's personal space. Go ahead. Stick me. Beat me. You'd be doing me a favor. But if you don't kill me, I will tear your head off. Reese blinked. He had expected fear. He had expected a broken old man. He hadn't expected the dead-eyed stare of a man who had nothing left to lose. Reese stepped back, sneering to save face. Crazy old bat. You'll get yours. He walked away. The tension in the room broke, but the eyes remained. Cal sat back down. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline he had forgotten he possessed. 5 miles away, Thorne was sitting in his rental car outside Kowalski's Salvage and Scrap. Thorne had been busy. He had subpoenaed Jesse Mercer's phone records. Most of the calls were to Cal or Ellen, but on the day of the explosion, there was a call to this junkyard. And a call to a burner phone that was currently untraceable. Thorne checked his pistol in the glove box. He was licensed to carry, and stepped out into the mud. Old man Kowalski was in the bay, stripping wire from a stolen alternator. He looked up, squinting at Thorne's suit. We ain't buying, Kowalski grunted. And we ain't selling. I'm not here for parts. Thorne said, flashing his private investigator badge. It looked enough like a police shield to make Kowalski nervous. I'm looking for information on a transaction. Or an attempted one. Don't know nothing. Thorne pulled out a photo of Jesse. This kid. He was here the day he died. What did he want? Kowalski looked at the photo. He wiped his greasy hands on a rag. Kid was frantic. Trying to sell something hot. I told him to beat it. I run a clean business. Clean? Thorne scoffed, kicking a hubcap that was clearly from a chop shop. What was he selling, Kowalski? Kowalski hesitated. He looked at Thorne's eyes. He saw the intelligence there. He knew this wasn't a beat cop he could bribe. He had a notebook. Kowalski muttered. Codes. Inventory stuff. And a key. A brass override key. And did he say who he was working with? He said it was his dad's stuff. But he was scared. He said he owed money. Big money. To who? Thorne pressed. I didn't ask. But... Kowalski lowered his voice. Before the kid showed up, I had another visitor that week. A guy asking about titanium prices. A guy named Vinny. Runs the loans out of the Rusty Spoke. Thorne's ears pricked up. Vinny. Did this Vinny buy anything? Not from me. But Vinny, he moves things. If the kid owed money, he owed it to Vinny. And if the foreman was stealing titanium, Vinny is the only guy in town with the connections to move that kind of metal. Thorne smiled. It was the smile of a man who had just found the missing corner piece of a puzzle. Thank you, Mr. Kowalski. You've been very helpful. Thorne turned to leave. Oh, and fix your fence. It looks terrible. Cal was lying on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, when the guard tapped on the bars. Mercer. Lawyer. Cal sat up. Already? Not the lady. Some guy. Says he's a specialist. Cal frowned. He didn't have money for a specialist. He was led to the visitation room. It was a sterile box with a plexiglass divider. On the other side sat a man Cal had never seen before. He was slick, wearing a suit that cost more than Cal's truck. He had a gold ring on his pinky. Cal sat down. Picked up the phone receiver. Who are you? Cal asked. Mr. Mercer, the man said smoothly. My name is Arthur Gentry. I'm a criminal defense attorney. A very good one. I have a public defender. I can't afford you. Your legal fees have been taken care of, Gentry said, opening a briefcase. An anonymous benefactor who believes in your innocence. Or at least believes you deserve a fair fight. Cal narrowed his eyes. Benefactor? Let's just say a concerned party who wants to ensure you don't feel pressured to talk about things that might complicate matters for others. Cal understood instantly. Vinny. Vinny was paying for the lawyer. Not to help Cal, but to keep him quiet. If Cal took a plea deal, he might have to allocate blame. He might have to give up names to reduce his sentence. Vinny wanted to make sure Cal had a defense that steered the narrative away from the loan sharks and kept it firmly on the tragic accident, or lone wolf, path. I don't want his money, Cal hissed into the phone. Mr. Mercer, Gentry said, his voice dropping an octave. You are facing 15 to 20 years. You are in a cage with wolves. My client is offering you a lifeline. He's offering to protect your interests. And perhaps, protect the assets you left on the outside. Cal's blood ran cold. The assets? Vinny knew about the house. He didn't know about the crawlspace yet, but he was looking. This wasn't a gift, it was a threat. Let me represent you, so I can control you. Or I go find the money myself. What does he want? Cal asked. He wants you to sit tight. Keep your mouth shut about any third parties. Let me handle the DA. We can probably get the manslaughter knocked down to negligence if we play hardball. But you have to be a team player. Cal looked at Gentry's polished fingernails. He was trapped. If he fired Gentry, Vinny would take it as a betrayal. Vinny might burn the house down just out of spite. And the money, Ellen's money, the only thing left of his sacrifice, would be gone. Fine, Cal whispered. You're my lawyer. Gentry smiled. It was a shark's smile. Excellent choice, Cal. I'll see you at the arraignment. Cal hung up the phone. He felt dirty. He was now officially on the payroll of the man who had driven his son to his death. But as he walked back to his cell, Cal had a thought. A dangerous, jagged thought. Vinny had just connected himself to Cal legally. He had established a link. If Cal was going down, maybe he could find a way to drag the anchor down with him. The wolf at the door. The Rusty Spoke was not the kind of place that saw many suits. It was a place for Carhartt jackets, steel-toe boots, and unspoken grievances. When Thorne walked in at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, wearing a tailored navy blazer and carrying his leather briefcase, the conversation died instantly. Thorne walked to the bar. He checked the stool for grease before sitting down. The bartender, a large man with a beard like steel wool, stared at him. "We don't sell fancy cocktails, pal." "Club soda," Thorne said. "Lime if you have it. But I suspect you don't." He placed a $10 bill on the scarred wood. Thorne turned on his stool, surveying the room. It was mostly empty, save for a few regulars and a table in the back. At that table sat Vinny, counting a stack of cash. Thorne picked up his soda, no lime, and walked over to the table. Vinny looked up. He covered the cash with a newspaper. "You lost, Professor? Library is uptown. Mr. Vincent Salerno," Thorne said, placing his drink on a coaster. "Also known as Vinny. Loan Shark. Fence. Unofficial mayor of the Bottoms." Vinny's eyes narrowed. "Who's asking?" "Arthur Thorne. Forensic investigator for the Liberty Mutual Insurance Group. And currently a special consultant for the district attorney's office regarding the Mercer case." The room got very quiet. Vinny's muscle, a guy named Tiny who was anything but, stood up from a nearby booth. Vinny waved him down. "Mercer," Vinny scoffed. "Tragic. Guy went crazy." "Sad story?" "It is," Thorne agreed. "But stories have plot holes. Like, for instance, why a foreman with 30 years of clean service suddenly decides to steal titanium. He needed money, obviously. But titanium is hard to sell. You can't just take it to a pawn shop." Thorne leaned forward. "I spoke to Mr. Kowalski at the scrapyard. He mentioned a young man trying to sell titanium inventory codes the day he died. And he mentioned you." Vinny laughed, but it was tight. "Kowalski is senile. He smells fumes all day." "Maybe. But here's the thing, Vinny. The titanium market is small. If Cal Mercer stole a coil, he had a buyer lined up. And if that buyer backed out, or if that buyer demanded more..." Thorne let the sentence hang in the air like smoke. "You accusing me of something?" Vinny asked, his voice low. "I'm telling you that I'm looking at you," Thorne said, standing up. "I'm looking at your bank accounts. I'm looking at your phone records. I'm looking at the associates you paid to clean up your messes." Thorne picked up his briefcase. "Cal Mercer is going to prison. But he's not going to want to die there alone. Eventually, he's going to trade a name for a lighter sentence. And I'd bet my pension that name starts with AV." Thorne dropped a business card on the table. "If you want to get ahead of the narrative, call me. First rat to the cheese doesn't get caught in the trap." Thorne walked out. Vinny stared at the card. His hand was shaking. He crumbled the card and threw it into an ashtray. "Tiny," Vinny barked. "Get the crew. Tonight." "What's the job, boss?" "Mercer's house," Vinny hissed. "That Fed-looking suit knows too much. If Mercer talked to the cops, he might have told them where the money is. Or where the rest of the records are. We need to scrub that house clean before the cops go back in." "Scrub it?" "I mean tear it apart," Vinny said. "If there's cash, we take it. If there's paper, we burn it. I want that place empty." The Mercer house stood silent in the moonlight. The police tape was still stretched across the front porch, sagging in the humidity. At 3 a.m., the back door was kicked in. It wasn't subtle. Vinny wasn't trying to be subtle anymore. He was trying to be thorough. Tiny and 2 other men stormed into the kitchen. They wore ski masks and gloves. They carried crowbars and sledgehammers. "Boss said check the walls," Tiny ordered. "Check the vents. Check under the floor." They started in the living room. Crack. A crowbar went through the drywall. They ripped out insulation, looking for hidden bundles of cash. They overturned the sofa and slashed the cushions. They pulled the books off the shelves and shook them out. They moved to the dining room. They smashed the china cabinet. It was a violation of the highest order. The house that Cal and Ellen had spent 30 years building, the home where they had raised Jesse, was being disemboweled. They moved to the kitchen. One of the goons, a wired junkie named Skeeter, was tossing cans of soup out of the pantry. "Nothing in here," Skeeter yelled. "Just food." "Check the floor," Tiny yelled from the hallway. Vinny said, "Floorboards?" Skeeter looked down. He saw the rug. The same rug Thorne had hesitated to lift. Skeeter kicked the rug aside. He saw the hatch. "Jackpot!" Skeeter shouted. "Tiny! Get in here!" Tiny squeezed into the pantry. He jammed his crowbar under the edge of the plywood hatch. With a grunt, he popped it open. The smell of damp earth rose up. Tiny shined his flashlight into the hole. He saw the disturbed dirt. He saw the corner of a black trash bag poking out from under the old Christmas decoration box. "Bingo!" Tiny grinned. He jumped down into the crawlspace. He dug with his hands, ripping the plastic. He pulled out the heavy duffel bag. He tossed it up to Skeeter. Skeeter unzipped it. Inside, wrapped in bands, was $35,000 in cash. "We got it," Skeeter laughed. "We got the stash." "Let's go," Tiny said, climbing out. "Leave the rest." They ran out the back door, carrying the bag. They left the house destroyed. Drywall dust hung in the air like smoke. Photos of Jesse and Ellen lay broken on the floor, covered in boot prints. The house was dead. It had been hollowed out, just like the mill, just like Cal. In cell 402, Cal woke up with a gasp. He sat up on his bunk, his heart racing. He didn't know why. There was no noise in the cell block, just the snoring of 100 men. But he felt a sudden, sharp pain in his chest. A feeling of absolute loss. He put his hand over his heart. "El?" he whispered into the dark. He had a feeling that something terrible had just happened. Something final. He didn't know that miles away, Vinny was sitting in his kitchen, counting the money that was supposed to save Ellen's life. Vinny stacked the bills. He looked at the serial numbers. They were non-sequential, used bills. Untraceable. "Good job, boys," Vinny said to Tiny. "This pays for your trouble." He tossed Tiny a stack of hundreds. Vinny put the rest of the money in his wall safe. He felt better. He had the cash. He had Cal's lawyer in his pocket. He had the leverage. But Vinny made a mistake. In his haste to count the money, he didn't check the duffel bag itself. He tossed the muddy black bag into the corner of his garage, intending to burn it later. He didn't notice that caught in the heavy zipper of the bag was a single, long blonde hair. A synthetic hair from a wig. Ellen's hair. From when Cal had packed the bag in the bedroom while she was sleeping. It was a microscopic thread of DNA connecting the stolen money, the dead woman, and the lone shark. And it was now sitting in Vinny's garage, waiting for a hunter like Thorne to find it. The kill box. The attorney consultation room smelled of cheap coffee and dread. Arthur Gentry sat opposite Cal, his expensive suit looking out of place against the cinderblock walls. He spread a document on the metal table, smoothing the creases with a manicured hand. "The district attorney is playing hardball, Cal," Gentry said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "They have the titanium dust. They have the destroyed evidence. They have the motive. They're looking for a conviction that sends a message." "What's the offer?" Cal asked. He sat with his arms crossed, the orange jumpsuit tight across his broad shoulders. 15 years, Gentry said. "Involuntary manslaughter, plus the obstruction charges running concurrently. With good behavior, you're out in 8 or 9. You'll be 60. Cal stared at the paper. 15 years. He would die in a cage. The mill would be torn down. Jesse's grave would be overgrown with weeds. "I didn't kill my son," Cal said. "Legally you did," Gentry countered. "You created the conditions. It's called proximate cause. If we go to trial, Sterling will paint you as a monster who sacrificed his kid for a payday. He'll ask for 25 to life. I did it for Ellen, Cal said, his voice rising. I did it because Vinny was threatening her. Why aren't you talking about that? Why aren't you going after the guy who put the gun to my head? Gentry's eyes went cold. He leaned in close. We discussed this, Cal. Bringing third parties into this complicates things. It makes you look like a snitch. And in a place like this, being a snitch is a death sentence. Cal looked at Gentry, really looked at him. He saw the sweat on the lawyer's upper lip. He saw the fear behind the polish. You're not working for me, Cal realized aloud. You're working for him. Vinny is paying you to bury me. Gentry stiffened. He began to pack his briefcase. I am working to save your life, Mr. Mercer. You're emotional. I'll give you 24 hours to consider the plea. If you turn it down, I can't guarantee what happens next. Tell Vinny I'm not taking the fall alone, Cal said, standing up. If I go down for 15 years, I'm taking him with me. I'll tell the DA everything. The debts. The threats. The titanium network. Gentry paused at the door. He didn't look back. That would be a very foolish decision, Cal. An hour later, Gentry sat in his Mercedes in the jail parking lot. He dialed a number. Yeah? Vinny's voice answered. He's not biting, Gentry said. He knows who's paying the tab. He says if he goes down, he's singing. He's going to give up the whole operation. There was a silence on the line. Then a heavy sigh. He's a problem, Vinny said. I thought taking his money would break him. I thought taking his house would break him. But this guy, he's made of iron. What do you want to do? Gentry asked. I can try to delay the deposition. No, Vinny cut him off. We're done with lawyers. The mill is rebuilding next month. I can't have a loose end talking to the feds while I'm trying to set up the new contracts. Handle it. I'm a lawyer, Vinny, not a hitman. You know people inside, Vinny said. Make a call. Green light. Tonight. The atmosphere in cell block C changed at dinner. It was subtle. The noise level dropped. Men stopped talking when Cal walked by with his tray. Eyes averted. It was the checkout. Silence. The collective holding of breath that happens when the population knows violence is coming. Cal felt it. He had worked in a steel mill for 30 years. He knew what it felt like right before a boiler blew. The pressure in the air. He sat alone. He ate quickly, his back to the wall. He saw Ruiz 2 tables over. Ruiz wasn't eating. He was staring at Cal, a small, cruel smile playing on his lips. Ruiz made a gesture, a finger across the throat, then winked. Cal dumped his tray and went back to his cell. He checked the toilet bowl for a loose piece of porcelain. Nothing. He checked his bunk for a piece of metal. Nothing. He was unarmed. Shower time! B-wing, let's go! The guard's voice echoed down the hall. Cal stayed on his bunk. He didn't want to leave the cell. Mercer! The guard yelled, banging on the bars. Hygiene is mandatory. Get moving! Cal looked at the guard. It was Officer Higgins, a cousin of his neighbor Martha. Usually, Higgins was friendly. Today, he wouldn't meet Cal's eyes. He knows, Cal thought. They paid him to look the other way. Cal stood up. If he refused, they would drag him out. If he fought in the cell, he was trapped in a box. He grabbed his towel and a bar of soap. He put the soap inside one of his socks. It wasn't much, but it was a flail. A hard weight at the end of a pendulum. He walked out into the corridor. He joined the line of men shuffling toward the shower block. The shower room was a tiled cavern, thick with steam. 20 shower heads lined the walls. The water was hot, scalding hot. Cal walked to the far end, putting his back in the corner. He turned on the water but didn't undress. He kept his towel wrapped around his hand, the soap sock hidden inside. The room filled up. Steam obscured everything. Then, the main door opened and closed. Click. The lock engaged. Cal looked toward the door. The guard was gone. The observation window was covered with a sheet of paper. The other inmates in the shower, 3 scared-looking kids and an old man, suddenly turned off their water and hurried toward the door, banging to be let out. Except for 3 men. Ruiz stepped through the steam. Flanking him were 2 massive inmates Cal didn't know. They were fully dressed in their jumpsuits. Ruiz held a shank, a toothbrush handle that had been melted down and sharpened into a wicked 4-inch spike. Told you, Pops. Ruiz grinned, the condensation dripping off his face. You should have slept with one eye open. Vinny sent you, Cal said, wrapping the towel tighter around his fist. Don't know no Vinny, Ruiz said. Just know that retirement came early for you. Come and get it, Cal growled. The 2 big men lunged first. Cal swung the sock. The bar of soap hit the first attacker in the temple with a sickening thud. The man went down, eyes rolling back. But the second man tackled Cal around the waist, driving him back into the tiled wall. Cal's head cracked against the ceramic. Stars exploded in his vision. He kneed the man in the gut, shoving him away. Ruiz stepped in, the shank flashing. He thrusted low. Cal twisted, but the plastic spike caught him in the side, just above the hip. It punched through the orange jumpsuit and bit into flesh. Cal roared. He ignored the pain. He grabbed Ruiz's wrist with his left hand, the hand that had guided tons of steel for decades. He squeezed. Ruiz screamed as the bones in his wrist ground together. The shank clattered to the floor. Cal headbutted him. Crack. Ruiz's nose exploded. But the second attacker was back up. He grabbed Cal from behind in a chokehold. His forearm pressed against Cal's windpipe. Cal struggled, gasping for air. The steam was suffocating. His vision began to tunnel. Ruiz picked up the shank with his left hand. His face was a mask of blood and rage. Hold him! Ruiz screamed. Hold him still! Ruiz raised the spike, aiming for Cal's chest. Cal kicked out, his boots slipping on the wet tiles. He couldn't break the hold. He watched the spike come down. This is it, he thought. I'm coming, Jesse. Suddenly, the shower room door burst open. Get down! On the ground! Now! A concussive blast shook the room. A flash-bang grenade. Bang! White light and a deafening ringing sound. Ruiz dropped the shank, clutching his ears. The man holding Cal let go. Cal slumped to the wet floor, clutching his bleeding side. Through the ringing in his ears and the smoke of the grenade, he saw a team of tactical officers swarming the room. Shields, batons, pepper spray. But leading them wasn't the warden. And it wasn't the sheriff. It was Thorne. Thorne stood in the doorway, wearing a Kevlar vest over his suit. He looked at Ruiz, then he looked at Cal. He walked over to where Cal lay bleeding. The water from the showers was turning pink around them. Thorne knelt down. You're a popular man, Mr. Mercer, Thorne shouted over the chaos. Someone really wants you dead. Cal looked up at him, gasping. Why did you stop them? Because, Thorne said, checking the wound in Cal's side. Dead men can't testify. And I need you to testify. Thorne keyed his radio. Suspect secure. He's stabbed. Get a medic in here. And put Salerno's men in isolation. Nobody talks to them. Thorne looked back at Cal. I found the money, Cal. Vinny's guys raided your house, but they were sloppy. We found a blonde hair in the bag they dumped. DNA matched to Ellen. Cal closed his eyes. Ellen. Even from the grave, she was saving him. Vinny has the money, Thorne said. I have the proof. And now, I have an attempted murder charge to hang on him. Thorne leaned close. The plea deal is off the table, Cal. I'm offering you a new deal. You turn state's evidence. You tell me everything about the titanium, the debt, and the explosion. You give me Vinny. Cal gritted his teeth as the medic applied pressure to his wound. If I do... Cal wheezed. What do I get? You get justice, Thorne said. For Jesse. Cal looked at the blood on the tiles. He looked at Reese, who was being zip-tied by the guards. Deal, Cal whispered. The turning. The prison infirmary was quiet, smelling of antiseptic and steel. Cal lay handcuffed to the bed rail, a thick bandage taped over his left side where Reese's shank had gone in. It was a flesh wound, painful, but it missed the kidney. Thorne sat in a chair next to the bed. A tape recorder spun slowly on the bedside table. District Attorney Sterling stood by the door, arms crossed, looking less like a shark and more like a man realizing he had been hunting the wrong fish. State your name for the record, Thorne said. Calvin Mercer. Mr. Mercer, are you giving this statement of your own free will, without coercion? I am. Tell us about the night of the explosion. Cal stared at the ceiling tiles. He took a breath, and for the first time in weeks, he let the truth out. It didn't feel like relief, it felt like vomiting. My son, Jesse, owed $50,000 to Vincent Salerno. Vinny threatened my wife. He said the stress would kill her. I couldn't pay it. So you stole from the mill? Sterling interjected. I tried to, Cal corrected. I used the crane to move a titanium coil, grade 4 aerospace, into my truck. To do it without tripping the inventory alarm, I had to bypass the weight sensor on the B-line. And that bypass, Thorne said, is what blinded the system to the structural failure. Yes, Cal whispered. The sensor would have caught the vibration. It would have shut the press down. I killed the safety, and the safety killed my son. The room was silent. Sterling looked at the floor. Even for a prosecutor, the raw math of Cal's tragedy was heavy. Where is the money now? Thorne asked. Vinny has it, Cal said. He sent his guys to my house. They dug it out of the crawl space. $35,000. I was going to use it for Ellen's treatment, but she died before I could spend it. Thorne stopped the recorder. He looked at Sterling. We have the confession, Thorne said. We have the DNA from the bag at Vinny's place. We have the attempted hit on a witness inside a state facility. It's a RICO case, Marcus. Sterling nodded, his face hardening. Get the warrant. I want Salerno. I want his crew. I want the bar shuttered. The raid on the Rusty Spoke happened at dusk. It wasn't a stealth operation. It was a statement. 3 SWAT trucks screeched into the gravel lot. Officers in full tactical gear poured out, shattering the windows and kicking in the heavy oak door. Police! Get down! Everybody down! Patrons scrambled under tables. Pool cues clattered to the floor. Vinny didn't scramble. He sat in his usual booth in the back, sipping a scotch. He watched the officers swarm the room with a look of mild annoyance, as if they were a bad cover band interrupting his evening. Thorne walked in behind the SWAT team. He walked straight to Vinny's booth. Mr. Salerno, Thorne said. You're under arrest for racketeering, grand larceny, conspiracy to commit murder, and the attempted murder of Calvin Mercer. Vinny finished his drink. He set the glass down. You got a lot of adjectives there, Suit. You got any proof? We found the bag, Thorne said. And we found the hair. Vinny's eye twitched. Just once. It was the only sign that he knew he was cornered. Cuff him, Thorne ordered. As they dragged Vinny out, passing the shattered neon signs and the terrified locals, Vinny locked eyes with Thorne. You think you won? Vinny shouted over the noise. You think this ends with me? You have no idea how this town works. Thorne watched him go. I know exactly how it works, Vinny. It rusts from the inside out. 2 hours later, Vinny sat in an interrogation room. He was chained to the table. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a survivalist's focus. Sterling and Thorne sat opposite him. Life, Sterling said, dropping a thick file on the table. That's what you're looking at, Vinny. Attempted murder of a witness carries 20 years alone. Add the RICO charges, you'll die in prison. Vinny looked at the file. Unless you give us something better, Thorne said. Cal Mercer was the thief. You were the fence. That's the story. Vinny laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. You think Cal Mercer, a foreman who drives a 10-year-old truck, figured out how to smuggle military-grade alloy out of a secure facility by himself? You think he just guessed which night the security cameras would have a glitch in the loading bay? Thorne froze. What are you talking about? Cal didn't disable the cameras. Vinny sneered. He doesn't have the clearance. Someone else turned the eyes off for him. Someone else made sure the shift logs were edited. Who? Sterling demanded. Vinny leaned forward, the chains rattling. I'm not the top of the food chain, boys. I'm just the middleman. I move the metal, but I don't source it. Cal was just a useful idiot. A desperate man who fit the profile. Who helped him? Thorne asked, his voice low. I want immunity, Vinny said. For the murder charges. I'll plead to the theft. But I walk on the hit. Sterling hesitated. It was a devil's bargain. Give me the name, Thorne pressed. Vinny smiled. Henderson. The plant manager. He's been skimming off the top for 3 years. He approves the waste reports. He clears the loading docks. Cal thought he was sneaking around, but Henderson let him do it. Because Henderson takes a 40% cut of everything I sell. Thorne felt the blood drain from his face. Henderson. The man who had stood by Cal's side at the explosion. The man who had consoled him at the funeral. The man who was currently running the mill. If Henderson is involved, Thorne said, then the negligence wasn't just Cal bypassing a sensor. It was systemic. Bingo, Vinny said. Henderson pushes the quotas. Henderson ignores the maintenance requests. Cal broke the machine, yeah? But Henderson broke the mill a long time ago. Vinny sat back. Check his offshore accounts. Cayman Islands. Under the name Ironwood Holdings. You'll find your proof. Thorne stood up. He looked at Sterling. We need to pick up Henderson, Thorne said. Now. Before he hears that Vinny is talking. He's at the mill, Sterling said, checking his watch. He's overseeing the demolition of Sector 4 tonight. The demolition? Thorne's eyes went wide. They're destroying the crime scene? They have a permit. Approved by the city this morning. Safety hazard. It's not a hazard, Thorne said, grabbing his coat. It's a cover-up. If they bulldoze Sector 4, they destroy the evidence of the camera tampering and the maintenance logs stored in the local server. Thorne ran for the door. Get the SWAT team back in the truck. We're going to the mill. At the Mercer steel mill, the night was lit up by floodlights. Henderson stood on the edge of the blast zone, wearing a white hard hat. He watched as a massive excavator clawed at the twisted remains of the beeline. The operator of the excavator looked down at him. You want us to clear the foundation too, boss? Everything, Henderson shouted over the engine noise. Scrape it down to the dirt. I want this whole area poured with fresh concrete by Monday. Henderson checked his phone. No word from Vinny. That was good. Vinny was probably halfway to Mexico by now, or so Henderson hoped. He adjusted his tie. He had played this perfectly. Cal was the fall guy. The insurance payout would cover the rebuild. And with the new automated machines coming in, he could fire half the workforce and boost his bonus. Burn it all, Henderson whispered, watching the steel teeth of the excavator rip through the control booth where Cal had made his fatal mistake. He didn't see the headlights of the police convoy racing down the access road. He didn't know that the iron hollow he had created was about to collapse on top of him. The Iron Hollow. Chapter 22, The Collapse. The excavator was a dinosaur of yellow steel, its hydraulic arm reaching into the sky before crashing down into the ruin of Sector 4. Crunch. Concrete shattered. Rebar screamed as it was torn from the foundation. Henderson stood 50 feet away, safe behind the yellow tape, watching the destruction with a frantic intensity. He checked his watch. The server node, the local backup that stored the camera feeds and the shift override logs, was located in a concrete bunker beneath the foreman's podium. Dig it out! Henderson yelled at the operator, waving his arms. Get to the sub-level! We need to stabilize the foundation! The operator, a contract worker who didn't know the politics of Blackwood, just nodded and pulled the lever. The bucket swung again, hovering over the spot where the evidence lay buried. Whoop whoop! Blue lights flooded the yard, cutting through the dust. The SWAT van smashed through the open gate, followed by 2 cruisers and Thorne's sedan. They didn't slow down. They boxed in the excavator, tires screeching on the gravel. Shut it down! Thorne roared, leaping out of his car before it had fully stopped. He had his badge in one hand and his service weapon drawn, pointed at the excavator cab. Power down! Now! The operator froze, the massive bucket hanging in the air like a guillotine. He raised his hands, terrified. Henderson ran forward, his face red. What the hell is this? We have a permit. This is a hazardous site. It's a crime scene, Henderson. Thorne holstered his weapon and marched up to the plant manager. And you're destroying evidence. Evidence of what? Henderson sputtered, sweat beading on his forehead. The fire destroyed everything. We're just clearing the debris so the roof doesn't collapse on anyone else. We know about Ironwood Holdings, Thorne said. The color drained from Henderson's face so fast it looked like he'd been bled. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. We know about the offshore accounts, Thorne pressed, stepping into Henderson's personal space. We know you authorized the camera shut off. Vinny Salerno is singing in D Block right now. He says you took 40%. Vinny is a liar, Henderson whispered, his eyes darting to the police officers surrounding them. He's a criminal. And what are you? Thorne asked. You watched a man bury his son. You stood at the grave. And you knew the whole time that you helped load the gun. Thorne turned to the sheriff. Arrest him. Wait. Henderson screamed as the deputies grabbed his arms. You can't prove the cameras were off. The server is gone. It melted in the fire. Thorne looked at the pile of rubble. He looked at the excavator. He knew Henderson was bluffing, but he also knew that if the server was damaged, he needed to find the physical backups. The hardline logs. He needed someone who knew the guts of this building better than the blueprints. He grabbed his radio. Bring him in. A sheriff's transport van pulled up to the perimeter. The back doors opened. Cal Mercer stepped out. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit, shackles on his ankles, and handcuffs on his wrists. He moved slowly, favoring his left side where the bandages were taped over his stab wound. He looked like a ruin himself, gray-faced, hollow-eyed, but standing upright. The deputies led him toward the light. Henderson saw him coming. The plant manager stopped struggling. He stared at Cal as if he were seeing a ghost rising from the slag pit. Cal! Henderson breathed. Cal stopped 10 feet away. The noise of the mill, the distant hum of the other sectors, the idling diesel engines, seemed to fade. You knew, Cal said. His voice was quiet, raspy from the smoke inhalation he hadn't fully recovered from. Cal, listen to me, Henderson pleaded, the desperation leaking out of him. I didn't know about the bypass. I didn't know you were going to rig the sensor. I just looked the other way on the inventory. I tried to help you. You helped me kill him, Cal said. Thorne stepped between them. Cal, we need to locate the sub-level junction box. Henderson says it's destroyed. If we can't pull the data from the night of the theft, we can't prove he authorized the camera blackout. Where is it? Cal looked at the wreckage of Sector 4. It was a tangled mess of steel and concrete. But Cal saw the ghost of the machine. He saw where the beeline used to stand. He saw where the foreman's podium had been. The main server is under the floor, Cal said, pointing to the crater the excavator had started. But Henderson is right. The heat from the fire would have cooked the drives. Henderson let out a breath, a tiny noise of relief. But, Cal continued, his eyes locking onto Henderson's, the analog backups aren't in the server room. They're in the maintenance tunnel. The rat hole. Henderson flinched. Where is the access point? Thorne asked. Cal shuffled forward, the chains rattling. He pointed to a heavy iron grate set into the floor, 20 feet away from the blast zone, currently covered by a stack of fallen ductwork. Down there, Cal said. It runs on a separate circuit. Copper wire. It records the breaker trips. If the cameras were cut manually, the breaker log in that tunnel will show exactly who did it and when. Thorne turned to the SWAT team. Move that debris. Get that grate open. Henderson sagged in the deputy's grip. The fight went out of him. He looked at Cal with a mixture of hatred and pity. I gave you a job, Cal, Henderson spat. I kept you on when you were too old to pull your weight. And this is how you repay me? You rat me out to save your own skin? Cal walked up to him. He was close enough to smell the expensive cologne Henderson wore to mask the smell of the mill. I'm not saving my skin, Cal said. I'm going to prison, Henderson. I'm going to die in a box. Cal leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Henderson could hear. But I'm not going to hell alone. The deputies dragged Henderson away, shoving him into the back of a cruiser. Thorne walked over to the grate. The officers had heaved the debris aside. They shone flashlights into the dark tunnel below. It was dry, unscathed by the fire. We got it, Thorne called out. The logs are intact. Cal stood in the center of the demolished factory. The wind blew through the holes in the walls, whistling through the twisted rebar. He looked at the spot where Jesse had died. The debris had been cleared away, leaving only a dark stain on the concrete. Mr. Mercer, Thorne said, walking back to him. We have what we need. You did the right thing. Cal looked at his shackled hands. There is no right thing, Cal said. There's just the truth. And the truth is heavy. We have to take you back, Thorne said gently. I know. Cal turned and walked back toward the prison van. He didn't look back at the mill. He didn't look back at the town. He climbed into the cage, sat on the metal bench, and waited for the doors to close. The mill was dead. The corruption was exposed. The debt was paid. But the hollow inside him was wider than ever. The gavel. 6 months later, the trees outside the county courthouse were bare, stripped of leaves by a harsh November wind. The seasons had changed, but the gray pallor over Blackwood remained constant. The courtroom was fuller than it had been for the arraignment. The spectacle of the mill murders had drawn national attention. True crime podcasters sat in the back row, typing on laptops. Locals stood along the walls, arms crossed, faces grim. Cal stood at the defense table. He had lost weight. The orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame, and his hair, once peppered with gray, was now entirely white. Judge Holloway adjusted his glasses, looking down at the paperwork that summarized the ruin of 3 lives. We have heard the sentencing recommendations, Holloway said, his voice echoing in the wood-paneled room. He looked first at the defense table to Cal's left, where Henderson sat. The former plant manager looked shrunken, his expensive suit now ill-fitting after months in jail. James Henderson, the judge read. For the charges of racketeering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and gross negligence leading to loss of life, I sentence you to 25 years in the state penitentiary. You traded the safety of your men for profit. You are the architect of this disaster. Henderson didn't react. He just stared at the table, a man already broken. The judge turned his gaze to the empty chair where Vinnie Salerno would have sat. Vinnie had already been processed in federal court the week prior, sentenced to life without parole at a supermax facility for his RICO convictions. The wolf of the bottoms was caged forever. Finally, the judge looked at Cal. Calvin Mercer. Cal stood up. His hands were clasped in front of him, shackled at the waist. You have pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and grand larceny, Holloway said. You have also cooperated fully with the state, providing the evidence needed to dismantle a criminal enterprise that has plagued this town for years. The judge paused. He took off his glasses. Mr. Mercer, the law is a blunt instrument. It struggles to measure tragedy. I believe you acted out of desperation to save your wife. I believe you never intended for your son to die. You have already suffered a punishment far greater than anything this court can administer. A hush fell over the room. For a moment, it seemed like mercy was coming. However, Holloway continued, his voice hardening, desperation does not excuse destruction. You compromised a machine. You introduced a hazard into a workplace where men trusted you with their lives. That breach of trust is unforgivable. A boy is dead because you thought you could cheat the odds. Cal nodded slowly. I know, Your Honor. I sentence you to 12 years in the State Department of Corrections, Holloway ruled. With credit for time served, you will be eligible for parole in 7 years. The gavel came down. Bang. It wasn't a life sentence, but for a man of 51 who had lost everything, 7 years felt like an eternity. Alicia Vance, his public defender, touched his arm. "It's a fair sentence, Cal. You'll be out before you're 60. "I'm already done, Alicia," Cal whispered. "The years don't matter." The bailiff stepped forward. "Let's go, Mercer." As they led him out, Cal looked back at the gallery. He saw Sarah, Ellen's sister. She was crying quietly. She raised a hand, a small wave of goodbye. Cal tried to smile, but he couldn't. He turned away and walked through the side door, into the holding cell, and toward the bus that would take him to the end of the world. The transport bus was a steel cage on wheels. Cal sat in the back, chained to the floor. Through the wire mesh reinforced windows, he watched the landscape roll by. They drove through Blackwood on the way to the highway. They passed the Mercer steel mill. It was silent. The gates were chained shut with a heavy padlock. A sign hung on the fence: "Property seized, federal investigation, no trespassing." The smokestacks, usually pumping white clouds into the sky, were cold and dead. The parking lot was empty. Weeds were already growing through the cracks in the asphalt. Cal watched it pass. He had spent 30 years inside those walls. He had given his sweat, his health, and finally his family to that place. And now, it was just a rusting skeleton. The bus turned onto the highway, picking up speed. The town of Blackwood faded into the gray distance, a smudge on the horizon. Cal leaned his head against the vibrating metal wall. He closed his eyes and listened to the hum of the tires. It sounded like the beeline used to sound, before the scream. Greystone Correctional Facility was a fortress of concrete and razor wire located 2 hours west, in the middle of a flat, agricultural nowhere. The processing was dehumanizingly efficient. Strip search. Shower. Uniform assignment, this time, a drab gray instead of orange. ID card. Mercer, Calvin. Inmate number 8940. The guard said, handing him a plastic bag with a toothbrush, a comb, and a bar of soap. Cell block D. You're in with a lifer. Keep your head down and your mouth shut. They walked him through the yard. Inmates stopped lifting weights to watch the new fish. Fresh meat, someone yelled. Cal ignored them. He walked with the heavy, plodding gait of a man carrying an invisible load. Cell 214. The door buzzed open. Cal stepped inside. The cell was identical to the one in County, just older and smellier. His cellmate was sitting on the bottom bunk reading a paperback book. He was an older man, black, with hair like white wool and arms as thick as tree trunks. The man looked up over reading glasses. You're the mill guy. It wasn't a question. Yeah, Cal said, putting his bag on the top bunk. Name's Pops, the man said. Don't ask why. Everyone just calls me Pops. I'm doing 25 to life for a robbery that went sideways in '98. Cal nodded. Cal. I know who you are, Cal, Pops said, marking his page. News travels. You took down the whole operation. Vinnie Salerno. Henderson. You cleaned house. I didn't do it to be a hero, Cal said, sitting on the thin mattress. Doesn't matter why you did it, Pops said. Matters that you did. You got respect in here, Cal. You stood up to the sharks. But, Pops pointed a finger at him. You also got ghosts. I can see 'em on you. They hang heavy. Cal lay back on the bunk, staring at the graffiti-scarred ceiling. Yeah, Cal whispered. They do. Well, Pops said, going back to his book. You got 12 years to make peace with them. Better start now. The lights flickered and dimmed. Lock up. Cal closed his eyes. For the first time in 6 months, he wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was just doing time. And in the silence of the prison, the ghost of Jesse Mercer finally sat down beside him. The scrapyard of memory. 1 year later. The machine shop at Greystone Correctional Facility smelled exactly like the Mercer steel mill. It was a cocktail of ozone, sulfur, and the sweet, cloying scent of cutting oil. Cal stood at a lathe, safety goggles over his eyes, watching a ribbon of steel curl away from the piece he was turning. He was repairing a hydraulic piston for the prison's laundry press. It was small work, delicate compared to the massive tonnage of the beeline, but it kept his hands busy. Mercer, the shop supervisor, a guard named Brady, called out. "You almost done with that drive shaft?" "5 minutes, boss," Cal said, not looking up. "Just finishing the thread." "Good. The laundry crew is screaming about the backlog. They got dirty undies piled to the ceiling." Cal turned the wheel, the cutting tool biting into the metal with a high-pitched whine. For most inmates, the noise was torture. For Cal, it was white noise. It drowned out the screams that still echoed in his nightmares. It drowned out the silence of his cell. He had become a fixture in the shop. The old man. The younger inmates left him alone, partially out of respect for his size, but mostly because he moved with the grim certainty of a man who had already survived the end of the world. He finished the piece. He wiped it down with a rag, checking the tolerance with a micrometer. Perfect. He handed it to Brady. "You're a wizard with this junk, Mercer," Brady said, inspecting the smooth steel. "Shame you're in here. You could make real money on the outside." Cal wiped his grease-stained hands. "I made money on the outside, boss. That's why I'm in here." Mail call was at 4 p.m. Cal usually stood in the back. He didn't get mail. Sarah had stopped writing 3 months ago. It was too painful for her to keep a correspondence with the man whose actions had led to her sister's death. He didn't blame her. "Mercer!" the guard shouted, holding up a white envelope. Cal blinked. He walked forward, feeling the eyes of the other inmates on him. He took the letter. The handwriting was jagged, blocky. The return address had no name, just a P.O. box in Williston, North Dakota. Cal took it back to his cell. Pops was playing solitaire on the bottom bunk. "You got a fan letter?" Pops asked. "Something like that," Cal muttered. He sat on his bunk and tore open the envelope. A single sheet of lined notebook paper fell out. "Cal, I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe because I'm leaving tomorrow and I needed to close the book. I'm in North Dakota now. Got a job on a fracking crew. The pay is good, but it's cold as hell. Not like the heat of the mill. You probably heard, but in case you didn't, the mill is gone. Not just closed. Gone. After the trial, the insurance company declared the whole structure a liability. They sold it for scrap to a Chinese holding company. They came in with torches last month. Cut the whole thing down. The blast furnaces, the rolling lines, the gantry. It took them 3 weeks to erase 80 years of history. Now it's just a mud pit with a chain-link fence. Main Street is dead, Cal. When the mill went, the diners went. The gas stations went. Henderson's trial killed the town's spirit, but the demolition killed its heart. Everyone is leaving. My mom moved to Florida to live with my aunt. I went by the cemetery before I left. I visited Jessie. The grass is growing in good. Someone left a toy car on the headstone. I think it was Vinny's old bartender. Even the bad guys miss him. I used to hate you, Cal. I hated you for lying to us. I hated you for almost getting me killed. But looking at that empty lot where the mill used to be, I just feel tired. We're all just parts in a machine that broke down. Don't write back. I won't be there. Miller. Cal lowered the letter. The mill was gone. The physical anchor of his life, the place where his father had worked, where he had worked, where his son had died, was erased. He closed his eyes and tried to picture the skyline of Blackwood without the smokestacks. He couldn't. It was like trying to picture a face without eyes. Bad news? Pops asked gently. The town, Cal whispered. It's gone. Towns die, Cal. Just like people. I killed it, Cal said. I tried to save my little piece of it, and I brought the whole thing down. Pops shuffled the cards. Snap. 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 You give yourself too much credit, Pops said. That town was dying long before you picked up a wrench. You just gave it the final push. It was rust, Cal. Rust never sleeps. It just eats until there's nothing left. Cal looked at the letter again. Miller was in North Dakota. Fracking. Another dangerous job. Another industry that chewed men up. He's safe, though, Cal murmured. He got out. Then take the win, Pops said. Small victories are all we get in here. Cal folded the letter and put it under his mattress. He lay back and looked at the ceiling. He imagined the empty mud pit in Blackwood. He imagined the rain filling the holes where the foundations used to be. A lake of ghosts. He realized then that he would never go back. Even when his 12 years were up, there was no Blackwood to return to. The Iron Hollow wasn't a place anymore. It was just him. He was the last remnant of the Mercer steel mill. That night, Cal dreamed of the mill. But in the dream, it wasn't burning. It was silent. The machines were cold. He was walking the catwalk, checking the gauges. He reached Sector 4. The beeline was there, pristine and silver. Jesse was standing by the controls. He was wearing his clean work clothes, the ones he wore before the drugs, before the debt. Hey, Dad, Jesse said, smiling. Pressure is holding steady. I'm sorry, Cal wept in the dream. I'm so sorry. It's okay, Jesse said. He pointed to the pressure gauge. Look. It's 0. No pressure. It's all gone. Cal looked at the gauge. The needle was resting on 0. He woke up with tears on his face. The prison was quiet. For the first time since the accident, the crushing weight in his chest felt a fraction lighter. Not gone. Never gone. But lighter. The mill was gone. The debt was paid. The punishment was happening. Cal turned over on his cot. He had 11 years left. He would serve them. One day at a time. One turn of the lathe at a time. He closed his eyes and listened to the silence. The rust. The heavy steel gate of Greystone Correctional Facility slid open with a screech that sounded like a dying bird. Cal Mercer stepped out. The sun was blinding. It was mid-July, and the heat rising off the asphalt parking lot shimmered in waves. He was wearing a gray sweatsuit provided by the state and carrying a clear plastic bag containing his personal effects, a wallet with expired ID, $40 in gate money, and a letter from a kid named Miller that was now yellowed with age. He was 58 years old, but he moved like a man of 80. His back was permanently stiff from the prison cot. His hands, once calloused from steel, were now soft and stained with machine oil from the prison shop. There was no one waiting for him. No family car. No smiling wife. Just a Greyhound bus idling at the curb, its engine chugging black smoke. Cal climbed the steps. The driver, a woman with tired eyes, didn't look at his face. She looked at the prison gate behind him. Where to? She asked. Blackwood, Cal said. His voice was rusty. He hadn't spoken much in the last year. Blackwood? She frowned, punching a ticket. Nobody goes to Blackwood anymore. Bus stops at the highway junction. You'll have to walk the last 3 miles. That's fine, Cal said. He took a seat in the back. As the bus pulled away, he didn't look back at the prison. He looked forward, toward the ghosts. The walk from the highway was brutal. The heat pressed down on him, heavy and humid. The sign welcoming him to town was half covered in kudzu vines. Welcome to Blackwood, EST 1912. Someone had spray-painted Deadwood over the name in fading red paint. The driver had been right. The town wasn't just quiet, it was erased. Main Street was a row of boarded-up windows. The gas station roof had collapsed under the weight of unshoveled snow winters ago. The traffic light at the intersection swung uselessly on a wire, dark and dead. Cal walked past his old house on Elm Street. He stopped. The yard was a jungle of waist-high weeds. The tire swing was gone, the rope had rotted and snapped. The windows were broken, jagged teeth of glass in the frames. The front door stood open, revealing the darkness inside. He didn't go in. There was nothing in there for him. The crawlspace was empty. The kitchen where he had argued with Jessie was full of dry leaves blown in by the wind. He kept walking. He reached St. Jude's Cemetery. This, at least, was maintained. The grass was cut, likely by a county crew that came through once a month. He found the plot. 2 headstones side by side. Jessie Mercer 2004 to 2025 beloved son. Ellen Mercer 1976 to 2025 beloved wife and mother. Cal fell to his knees. The dirt was warm. "I'm back," he whispered. "I took the long way, but I'm back." He touched the cold granite of Jessie's stone. "I paid the bill, kid. I served the time." He looked at Ellen's stone. "I didn't bring flowers. I didn't have enough money. But I brought myself." He sat there for an hour, telling them about the prison machine shop, about Pops, about the silence. He told them he was sorry. He said it over and over until the words lost their meaning and just became breath. When the sun began to dip low, casting long shadows across the graves, Cal stood up. "One last stop," he said. The site of the Mercer steel mill was unrecognizable. Miller had been right. The Chinese holding company had been thorough. They had stripped every ounce of metal. The smokestacks were gone. The warehouses were gone. The fences were gone. It was just a vast, flat expanse of concrete foundations, cracked and broken, stretching out toward the river. Nature was reclaiming it. Birch saplings were pushing up through the cracks in the loading bay. Weeds choked the spaces where the blast furnaces had roared. It looked like ancient ruins, a temple to a forgotten god. Cal walked out onto the slab. He navigated by memory. Here was the break room. Here was the locker room. Here was the gantry. He reached the center. The spot where Sector 4 had been. The explosion crater had been filled in with gravel years ago, but the depression was still there, a shallow bowl in the earth. Water had collected in it, forming a small, dark pool. Cal sat down at the edge of the water. It was quiet. No grinding gears. No hissing hydraulics. Just the sound of crickets starting their evening song and the distant rush of the river. He looked into the water. He saw his reflection. An old man with white hair and sad eyes. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out the only thing he had kept hidden for 7 years. It was a small brass key. Not the override key, that had melted in the fire. This was his locker key. Number 402. The locker where he had kept photos of Jessie playing baseball. He held it over the water. "Iron rusts," Cal whispered to the empty air. "Everything rusts." He dropped the key. Plip. It broke the surface, sending tiny ripples outward. They spread across the dark water, distorting his reflection until he was just a blur. The key sank to the bottom, settling into the mud where the beeline used to stand. Cal didn't move. He watched the sun set behind the hills, turning the sky a bruised purple. The air cooled. The fireflies came out, blinking yellow in the twilight. He was alone. He was broke. He was a felon. But for the first time in 8 years, the pressure in his chest was gone. The sensor was finally clear. Cal Mercer lay back on the warm concrete, staring up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. He closed his eyes, listened to the wind moving through the birch trees, and waited for the night to take him. The end.